Hi, I'm Bobby Owsinski. If you're watching this video, it's probably because you're either new to mixing and aren't sure what to do, or your mixes aren't anywhere near where you'd like them to be. Mixing is one of those things that you have to learn by doing, and the more you do it, the better you become. I'll take you through how to optimize your listening environment, the most efficient way to prepare and set up a mix, how to properly balance your mix, best way to apply EQ to the various instruments, vocals, and loops in order to achieve a big-sounding and powerful mix. The best way to add effects like reverb, delay, and modulation to make the mix sound bigger and fatter.
Somebody like you. How could I do all the silly things?
How to build a mix around the most interesting mix element, and the differences between an amateur and pro-sounding mix. I'll take you through all the areas of mixing that will not only get you on the right track, but possibly cut a lot of time off your learning curve as we dig deep into the world of mixing. Finding the correct position in the room for your monitors is just as important to the sound as the monitor speakers themselves. In this video, I'm going to explain how to find the ideal place in the room to set up your monitor system. The place that provides the best acoustic performance will almost always come from setting up lengthwise in the room. That's because it's easier to avoid some of the problem room reflections that can interfere with the room's frequency response. In other words, the speaker should be firing the long way down the room. The frequency response of the room is the way it responds to the high, mid, and low frequencies. Ideally, you want an even balance of all these frequencies with none of them accentuated or attenuated. Without getting into too many technicalities, every room suffers from reflections that reinforce at the 50% point of the room, and then diminish at the 25% and 75% points. That means if your listening position is exactly halfway in the room, one frequency will be extremely loud, but it might be non-existent at the 25% and 75% points in the room. For example, in a typical room with a 12-foot length, the standing wave will be 47 Hz, which is determined by the formula of 1,130 feet per second, which is the speed of sound, divided by the 12-foot length of the room times 2. That means 47 Hz will evenly bounce back and forth in the room. If you place either your speakers or your listening position midway in the room at the 50% point, 47 Hz will reinforce and it will sound extremely loud. If you place the speakers or listening position at either a quarter of the way in the room at the 25% point or a quarter of the way from the rear wall at the 75% point, 47 Hz will cancel out. As a result, you want to place both the speakers and listening position somewhere in between 25, 50, and 75% of the room, in a point that's an odd, non-divisible number like 27, 38, or 45%. Many acoustic designers feel that the 38% point is the ideal listening place in the room. The 38% point in the room may or may not be the best place for your speakers in your particular room, which is why you must be prepared to experiment with placement a few inches backwards or forwards. There are so many variables involved with just about any room that even the best designers with the best equipment can't precisely predict the correct placement. As a result, many spend an entire week just tweaking the speaker and listening placement, so don't be surprised if it takes some time and experimentation to get it right. Although it's always best to acoustically treat your room, that's not always possible. Here are a few simple things that you can do to instantly improve the performance of your playback system without using any acoustic treatment. Avoid placing the speakers up against the wall. This usually results in some strong peaks in low frequency response. The further away you get from the wall, the less it influences the frequency response of your monitors, and the smoother that response will be. Figure an absolute minimum of 12 inches, although more is better. Avoid the corners of the room. Even more severe than the wall is a corner, since it will reinforce the low end even more than when placed against a wall. The worst is if only one speaker is in the corner, which causes the response of your system to be lopsided on the low end towards the speaker that's located there. Avoid being closer to one wall of the room than the other. If one speaker is closer to one side wall than the other, once again you'll get a totally different frequency response between the two because of phase and reflection issues. It's best to set up directly in the center of the room if possible. Symmetry is essential to keep a balanced stereo image with a stable frequency response in the room. That means that your sweet spot will be in the exact center of the room if the speakers are exactly the same distance from each side wall. Although the layout of your room may suggest some other position, acoustically you could be asking for trouble. Avoid different types of wall absorption. If one side of the room contains a window and the other is drywall, carpet, or acoustic foam, once again you'll have an unbalanced stereo image and one side will be brighter sounding than the other. Try to make the walls on each side of the speakers the same material. Make sure you place the speakers on stands. Speakers mounted directly on a desk or console can even defeat well-designed acoustic treatment. Mark the position of the speakers with masking tape and mark the position of 1-inch increments up to 6 inches either way from the wall. That way, you don't have to remeasure in the event that you have to move things. Exact distances are critical, so always use a tape measure because even an inch can make a big difference in the sound. So that's how to quickly and easily improve the sound of your room. Now that your listening position is placed correctly in the room, it's time to set up your monitor speakers. In this video, I'm going to show you how to get the most out of your monitors regardless of the brand or type. While most home studios seem to have a random amount of space between their monitors, there are a number of general guidelines you can use to optimize your setup. Since most rooms are unique in some way in terms of dimensions or acoustic qualities, you may have to vary from the following outline a little, but these are good places to start. Check the distance between the monitors. If the monitors are too close together, the stereo field will lack definition. If the monitors are too far apart, the focal point or sweet spot will be too far behind your head, and you'll hear the left or right side individually, but not both together as one. The rule of thumb is that the speakers should be as far apart as their distance from the listening position. That is, if your listening position is 4 feet away from the monitors, then start by moving them 4 feet apart so that you can make an equilateral triangle between you and the two monitors. That being said, it's been found that 67.5 inches from tweeter to tweeter seems to be an optimum distance between speakers and focuses them 3 to 6 inches behind your head, which is exactly what you want. Check the angle of the monitors. Not angling the speakers properly will cause smearing of the stereo field, which is a major cause of a lack of instrument definition when you're listening to your mix. The correct angle is somewhat determined by taste. Some mixers prefer the monitors angled directly at their mixing position, while others prefer the focal point anywhere from 3 to 24 inches behind them to widen the stereo field. The focal point is where the sound from the tweeters converges. It's been found over time that an angle of 30 degrees that's focused about 18 inches behind the mixer's head works the best in most cases. A great trick for finding the correct angle is to mount a mirror over each tweeter and adjust the speakers so that your face is clearly seen in both mirrors at the same time when you're in the mixing position. Check how the monitors are mounted. If at all possible, it's best to mount your monitor speakers on stands just directly behind the meter bridge of the console or the edge of your desk. This gives you a much smoother frequency response. Monitors that are placed directly on top of a computer console or a console meter bridge without any isolation are subject to low-frequency cancellations. This is because the sound travels faster through the desk or console and reaches your ears before the direct sound from the monitors through the air. This causes some frequency cancellation and a general smearing effect of the audio. If you must set your speakers on the desk or console, place them on a 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch piece of open-cell neoprene, a thick mouse pad or two, or something like the Prime Acoustic recoil stabilizers. You'll be surprised how much better they sound as a result. Check how the monitor parameters are set. Almost everyone uses powered monitors these days, but don't forget that many have a few parameter controls on the front or the rear. Be sure that these are set correctly for the application by reading the manual, then set them the same on each monitor. Check the position of the tweeters. Many monitors are meant to be used in an upright position, yet users frequently will lay them down on their sides. That makes them easier to see over, but the frequency response suffers as a result. That being said, if the speakers are designed to lay on their sides, most mixers prefer that the tweeters be on the outside towards the walls because the stereo field is widened. Sometimes speakers to the inside works, but that usually results in a stereo image smearing. Try it both ways and see which one works best for you. If your speakers are placed upright, be sure that the speakers are at head height. The high frequency response at the mixer's position will suffer if they're too high and firing over your head. Sometimes it's necessary to even flip them over and place them on their tops in order to get the proper tweeter height. Before you even get into mixing, it's best to set up your session so the mix is both a lot more efficient and keeps you from making any mistakes as well. In this video, I'll show you all the different things that you can do to prep your DAW session. Before anything else, the first thing I like to do is make a copy of the file. So if this was the file that we recorded into, the first thing I'll do is I'll right-click on the mouse, I'll bring up this dialog, and I'll go down and say duplicate. Next thing I want to do is I want to rename it. And since this is going to be a mix, I'm going to call it Mix 1. The reason why I want to call it Mix 1 is if you're doing this right, you may have a lot of mixes. You'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there may be up to 100. And it's not unheard of to go that far. Many times what I'll also do is add a date right behind it as well. That's not absolutely necessary because you can see every file over here is timestamped, so it tells you when the file is actually made, when it was created, when it was modified. The next thing we want to do is delete any tracks that don't have any audio in them. So for instance, here's guitar 3, it says, and if we look through the whole song, we don't see any waveforms, which means we didn't record on it. The reason why we want to get rid of this is even though you're not using them, empty tracks actually take up system resources. And there may come a time if you have too many of these in your session that you may actually be prohibited from adding an extra processor or an extra plug-in because these empty tracks that aren't doing anything for you are actually taking up that extra processing power. So I want to right-click, and once again I bring up a dialog box and I want to delete this. You come over here to Audio 2. Well, Audio 2 is pretty non-descriptive. We don't know what it is, but it doesn't matter because if we take a look, there's no waveform. So we'll go over here and we'll get rid of it. The next thing we want to do is if there's a track that we know we're not going to use, we want to get rid of that as well. So for instance, background vocal 2, we're not going to use. Now we don't want to delete it at all. We just want to make it inactive. So we'll come over here and we'll say, make inactive. Once again, what that will do is that will enable some extra system resources for us to use as plugins. We'll go another step and we can say, just having this here is distracting and it gets in our way, and since we're not using it, why not hide it? So we'll come over here again, right-click on the mouse, hide, and there it goes. Now again, if we're not using it, there's no point in having it in the mix. The next thing that I always do is I try to group everything together that needs to be grouped together. So if we go and we look at our mix window, we can see both our kicks are there. We have a kick that's inside the kick drum, and we have a mic that was outside the kick. So we want to put those together, and now we have a snare top, which means there's a snare bottom somewhere, and here's our snare bottom. I want to make sure they're there because they're easier to manipulate together. Same thing with the floor tom. Now we see we have two toms, tom 1 and tom 2. Well, the floor tom over here doesn't do as much good. We can still hear it, but it's so much easier if we bring all the toms together because it will make our panning so much easier down the line. We want to make sure that all of the light tracks are grouped together. So all the guitars we want to put together, all of the keyboards we want to put together, all the drums we want to put together. Percussion I like to put right after the drums, so there's like instruments that are all together, and that will help us be more efficient down the road. The next thing that we want to do is come over here to any track that isn't named in such a way where it's very descriptive. Now you can see if you look across all the tracks, just about everything has a name that we can immediately tell what it is. We see guitar, we see GTR2, which means guitar 2. We see room, which is a room mic. We see OHL and OHR, which is overhead left, overhead right. Well, that all makes sense. But now we come down here to this one right here that says 1.12 BLZ for a track name. If you're just coming in as a mixer and you saw this, you'd scratch your head and you go, I don't know what that is. And you'd have to play it to try to figure it out. Since I tracked this, I know what it is. I happen to know that it's a tambourine. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this. Once again, I'll right-click on the mouse and I'll come down here and say rename tambourine. So now we want to make sure that all those tracks have a descriptive name, so it's very easy for us to get to when the time comes that we have to get to it. And then lastly, one thing I like to do is to color code all of our tracks. And again, this helps find groups of tracks when you really need them. So for instance, kick in, kick out have two different colors, and the snare top and snare bottom have two more different colors. And as you keep on looking down the line, each drum track actually has a different color. And it would help us a whole lot if they each had the same color. So now we're going to go up and we're going to say color palette. And this will be different in different DAWs, but now we'll shift click and select all of our drums. And we'll select just one color. In this case, I'm going to go to green for no other reason that I happen to like green for drums. So now we can see these are all drum tracks. We'll do the same thing for guitars. And if you see here, there's 4 guitar tracks. And actually, it's 2 stereo guitars, but they all have different colors. So once again, we'll shift-click on all 4 tracks, and in this case, we'll come up here on red, and red tells us they're all guitars. And this really helps when we have to find something very quickly. We can just go to a color. And everybody sort of gets their own colors that they like for different tracks. There's no one acceptable standard, and you'll have to figure out what you like that works best for you. So that's how you set up a session to get ready to mix. Groups and subgroups are extremely useful during mixing because they allow you to group similar elements of the mix so you can make adjustments by instrument sections rather than individually. In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up groups and subgroups and why they're so important when mixing. The first thing that happens when we're mixing is we usually have a lot of similar instruments that are together. Now, if we look at the kick drum, for instance, we have a mic that's inside the kick drum, which is kick in, and we have another one that's outside, which is kick out. They both sound different, and if we take a quick listen, we find out that both of them sound good, but they sound even better together. Now, what ends up happening is if I want to adjust the level, either up or down, of both channels at the same time, I'm going to have to move this up a little bit, and I'm going to have to move this up a little bit, and you can see how imprecise it is. So it's much better if we can link them together, and the way we do that is with something called a group. Anything that we want in the group we'll select. So come down with our mouse and we'll click on kick in, and we'll shift click on kick out, and there we go. Now we can either say Command G, or we can just go up to track and say group. And you can see over here it says currently in the group, kick in, kick out. And if there's anything else we wanted to put in there, it'd be really easy. All we'd have to do is say hat, tom, or whatever, and then just say add, and it would be there. In this case, this is only for kicks, so kick in and kick out is just enough. Now we'll go to name and we'll say this is kick. As we move one fader, the other one follows, and they follow in exactly the same proportion as we left them. So watch. The other thing that happens is the mutes also follow. If I want to mute both channels, and let's say I have 5 channels that are all linked together, they'll all mute, or they're all solo. And that's kind of the beauty of that as well. So that's a group. We can also do the same thing on the snare drum, for instance. And once again, it's the same thing where the snare is very precise in terms of level between them. Now, if we come in and have a listen here, as soon as the snare comes in, so that's the top of the snare drum. That's the bottom. You can hear the snap of the bottom. We put them both together and they sound pretty good. Now, once again, if we wanted to raise both channels, let's say we just need to goose it a little bit, or even if we were riding both channels, we wanted to ride a fade, something like that, it would be pretty difficult to do both channels at the same time. So that's why we'd like to group it. So once again, we'll say shift click on both channels so they're both selected. Command G, which brings up our create group, and in this case we're going to say snare. You can see currently in the group, snare top, snare bottom. And an interesting thing also in Pro Tools is you can see the groups named. And what will happen is right now, these are grouped together. You can see the snare go up or down, they mute together, they solo together. But if I come over here and I deselect it, all of a sudden this group goes away. And you can see just one fader at a time moves. Come over here, we select snare, both of them are grouped again. So that's a group. Sometimes we don't want a group though. Sometimes we want something called a subgroup. And a subgroup is a little bit different in that it adds an extra fader, but it gives you a bit more flexibility. What we're going to do is come over to our B3. Now, the B3 runs through a speaker cabinet called a Leslie. And the Leslie has a rotating horn on the top for the high frequencies and a rotating horn on the bottom for low frequencies. And it sounds something like this. Here's just the high. Here's the lows. Add them both together and it sounds big and round and full. So if we wanted to, we could just group them together as we did with the kick and the snare. But in this case, we want to do something else with them. What we're going to do is we're going to add a subgroup. Select them, we're going to go up to track and we're going to say new. And we want a new instead of an audio track, an input track. So now we have our subgroup. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to name it. So again, we bring our mouse over, we right click, and it comes up and it says rename. I always name subgroups with caps. So in this case, it's an organ. I'm going to say organ in capital letters. This is an easy way for me to differentiate between regular audio tracks and subgroups. The next thing we have to do is we have to actually assign the tracks that we want to go into the organ subgroup. So for instance, we're going to say bus 19. We haven't used bus 19. Now I want this track to go to bus 19. So now if we take notice, when we hit play, both tracks are solo, but we don't hear them. The reason why is we also have to solo the subgroup track. Now we can hear both tracks together. And just like with the group, a subgroup allows us to move the level of both tracks up and down. Take notice the difference is, though, that the levels of your individual audio tracks don't move as they do with groups. But here's the cool thing that happens. With a subgroup, we're able to actually add an EQ or any kind of effect across a subgroup. And that, in fact, works across anything that's assigned to it. So, for instance, if I wanted to add reverb, I'll come up here to the send, but I'll do it on the subgroup. Say we want to go to the short reverb. Okay, now listen. Now what ended up happening there was I was able to add some reverb to both of those B3 channels. Now the beauty of this is this allows you to add just one reverb instead of two. Now for instance, if you had 5 background vocals, for instance, you would be able to add reverb to all 5 with just one subgroup. This saves you some system resources because instead of having 5 different EQs, you only need one in this case. So if I wanted to EQ both the high and low channels of the B3, all I do is I'd add an EQ on the subgroup and both channels would be EQ'd. And that's kind of the beauty of it. Now, this enables you to do a very, very quick and easy mix because in this case, I'll have a subgroup just for my drums. Now I have one just for the organ. I have one over here for guitar. I have another one for the second guitar. I have one for vocals. And by doing this, instead of having to move individual channels, after I got my balance, I can just move one channel and move the mix in different directions. So this is a very powerful way of doing things. To sum it up, groups and subgroups allow you to group similar elements of the mix so you can make adjustments by instrument sections rather than individually. In a group, a number of channel faders like drums are digitally linked together so that you can move one fader in the group and they all move, yet they all keep the same relative balance. In a subgroup, you assign the desired channels to a subgroup fader, which lets you insert processing in all the channels that were assigned. Mixes go a lot faster if you set up your effects before you begin your mix. In this movie, I'm going to show you a couple of quick and easy effect setups that will sound good for not only mixing, but tracking and overdubs as well. It's a good idea to have at least some effects set up before you start the mix so you won't break your concentration to set them up later. The first thing we're going to do is set up 2 effects, and these are going to be just reverb. We're going to go up to the track menu. We're going to say new. And since reverbs are usually in stereo, we're going to have 2 stereo aux inputs. The first thing we'll do is name our aux inputs, and we'll name them short reverb and long reverb. Now the next thing is we'll insert some reverbs into these channels. So on the short reverb, we'll come up to Insert A, multi-channel plug-in, and come down to reverb. I happen to like the D-verb, so we'll add that. And usually a short reverb is added to the drums, especially the snare. So we're going to start with a small room, and we're going to take the decay time and put it up at about 1.5 seconds. This is only a starting place, and in fact this will be tweaked to the track when we get into it a little bit later. And the pre-delay, we're going to bring that up to about 20 milliseconds. Pre-delay is the onset of where the reverb starts. So if you hit a snare drum, the reverb will actually start 20 milliseconds later. And once again, this is only a starting place for us. We'll tweak this later to the track. This is the short reverb. We'll go to the long reverb. And once again, we'll add an insert on A. We'll go to multi-channel plug-in, come down to reverb, and say D-verb again. And in this case, we'll go to a plate. Usually we want to add a different sounding reverb every time. I'll keep this large. We'll put this maybe at 2 seconds. And once again, we'll add 20 milliseconds of pre-delay, and this is going to change, again, depending on the tempo of the track and depending on what the track needs. So now we started with 2 reverb effects channels. Now we're going to add 2 delay effects channels as well. Do the same thing. We'll come up to the track menu, say New. We want 2 of them. And delays are usually in mono. So we'll say mono, aux inputs. We create them. And once again, we'll rename them, say the same thing. We will say short delay. And the second one, we'll say long delay. Now for the short delay, come down to delay, same thing, on insert A, and we'll just go to long delay in here. And the reason why I like to use long delay is if I have to change this later, it gives me some room to move. I can move it up so it's really long, I can move it down so it's short. If you only select the short delay, it stays very short. And if you decide that you want a longer delay, then you have to reinsert it. This is just an easier way to do it, at least in Pro Tools. So now for delay, I'm going to take it down to maybe 175 milliseconds. And the reason why I chose 175 is that's a favorite of Paul McCartney's. If it's a favorite of his, it's a favorite of mine. And feedback, which is the number of repeats, we'll add 4%. And once again, this is just a starting place because we'll change this depending on the tempo of the track and depending on what the track needs. So this is our short delay. Now we're going to go to the long delay. We'll go to our plugin on insert A, come down to delay, and we'll say long delay 2 mono, and we'll go to about 300 milliseconds or so, and come up with 3 or 4% of feedback, and that's a good place to start. We're not finished, however, because in order for the channels to send into these effects, what we need to do is set up a path for that to happen. So, for the short reverb, come up here to where it says no input, and this is actually the input into that effects channel. And we're going to go down to the bus and say bus 11 and 12 is the input into the short reverb. Into the long reverb, we're going to come down here and we're going to assign bus 13 and 14. Remember, it's stereo, so there'll be 2 buses. Since the delays are mono, there'll only be 1 bus, and we'll come down to bus 15 for the short delay, and now we'll come down to bus 16 for the long delay. We're not finished yet, even though we have all of our effects set up. Now what we want to do is we want to go to the channels that we think we're going to be adding reverb and delay on and set those up so they're pretty much ready as soon as we get into the mix. So we know for sure that we're going to add it on the snare. So we'll go and we'll add an effects send, and this is going to be on the very short reverb, and the short reverb was on bus 11 and 12, and it is all set up. And we're going to add a short reverb probably on the toms as well. So an easy way to set it up is you hit Option, and all you do is drag this send and then drop it on the floor tom, and we'll do it again on tom 2 and tom 1, and now we're set up on the drums to add reverb. Now let's say we want to add a longer reverb. We're going to add this on the guitars and on the organ. One of the beauties of having subgroups, and this is something we talked about in the last movie, was that it allows us to add reverb on several channels by just adding it on the subgroup channel. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to go to the organ subgroup, and we're going to say bus 13 and 14, which is the long reverb, and that's all set up and ready to go. And we're going to add the same thing over on the guitars. So now we have guitar 1. We bring this over guitar 1 on the subgroup. Bring it over on guitar 2 on that subgroup as well. Now, vocals. The lead vocal, well, we went to Paul McCartney 175 milliseconds, and that's the short delay. So now we're going to come over to the bus. We're going to add bus 15, and that's all ready to send to the short delay. And for the background vocals, we want the long delay. So we'll come over here and we'll set this up for bus 16. And now our whole mix is set up and ready to go. To sum it up, setting up your effects before you begin mixing can help your mix go a lot faster. Your own particular starting point might use a lot more effects, and you might add more effects as you go. You probably will, but this is a good place to start from. Your mix will never sound as good as it can unless the groove of the song is emphasized. In this video, I'm going to show you how to identify, then emphasize the groove of the song that you're mixing. The groove is the pulse of the song. Every kind of music, regardless if it's R&B or jazz or rock or country or even some alien space music, has a groove. The better the music is performed, the deeper the groove is. A groove doesn't have to have perfect time because a groove is created by tension against even time. Music loses its groove if it's too perfect, which is why a song can sound lifeless after it's quantized in a workstation. It's lost its groove. The groove doesn't always come from the drums and bass. It can come from other instruments as well. Some songs like The Police's Every Breath You Take has the rhythm guitar establishing the groove, while most of Motown's hits of the 60s relied on James Jamerson's bass. Regardless of what instrument is providing the groove of the song, if you want a great mix, you've got to find it and develop it first before you can do anything else. Let's have a listen to this song and see if you can find the groove.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, but never like this before. You got me tracking behind you, running on my knees, pleading and begging for more.
Now, on first listen, you might think it's the drums. You might think the combination between the kick and the snare and the hi-hat providing the groove, and you'd probably be right. Let's listen to what the song sounds like without the drum track.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, and teased, but never like this before. You got me tracking behind you, running on my knees.
Now, in this case, you can still feel the pulse, and the pulse is coming from the tambourine. If we pull the tambourine out, now listen.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, and teased, but never like this before. You got me tracking.
Now, here you have a number of instruments that imply the groove, but you don't really feel it as much as when you have the drums in there. And that's why you have to find that groove and then emphasize it. Now, listen again with just the drums and hear what it sounds like. Now you can feel that pulse pretty well. Let's listen to everything together.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, and teased, but never like this before. You got me tracking behind.
And you can tell when you put everything together and the groove is emphasized, the song feels really strong. It feels really compelling to listen to. And that's the important part. You're trying to find that groove, and you're trying to emphasize it, and that's what we've done here. In order to practice finding the groove, play a song from a genre that you seldom listen to, and then see if you can feel the pulse of the song. Try to determine what instrument or instruments are providing it. What makes the groove stand out? Is it because the instruments providing the groove are louder than everything else? Is it the tone of those instruments? Are they punchier sounding than the others? All these things contribute to the groove. In closing, your mix will never sound great until you find the groove of the song. Every song has some element that acts like a hook to capture the listener's attention. In this video, I'm going to show you how to find that element and emphasize it to bring excitement to your mix. Most important element captures the listener's attention. Many times it's the vocal, but it can be other elements as well. Usually it's an element that's so important that without it, the song just wouldn't be the same. Think of the piano line in Coldplay's Clocks, or the clavinet in Stevie Wonder's Superstition, or the intro guitar line in the Rolling Stones' Satisfaction. If they weren't there, it would be almost a different song. Finding the most important mix element is vital to getting a great mix, because it's what provides the excitement and the reason for you to listen. In a dance song, it might be the kick drum. In an R&B song, it could be the groove. In a pop song, it might be an interesting hook that an instrument plays in the intro or the interludes. And yes, it could even be the vocal in just about any genre. So let's take a listen to our example and see if we can find the most important element.
Sometimes I didn't rest at all. I've been shifted, lifted up sky high, lost on a waterfall.
Now, there's not a signature line in this kind of song, So we're actually going to go through all of the elements and see which one we'd miss the most if it weren't there. Now let's start first with the organ.
Sometimes I didn't rest at all. I've been shifted, lifted.
Okay, we kind of missed it, but it wasn't that big a deal that it wasn't there. Let's listen without guitar number 1.
Sometimes I didn't rest at all. I've been shifted, lifted.
Okay, let's listen without guitar number 2.
Sometimes I didn't rest at all. I've been shifted, lifted.
Okay, that didn't make all that much of a difference either. Let's go and listen without the bass. Now this might sound a little radical, but have a listen anyway.
Sometimes I didn't rest at all. I've been shifted, lifted, up sky high, lost.
Now we really missed it for a couple of reasons. First of all, the bottom or the foundation of the whole mix, and of course that's a big deal. But the biggest thing is the motion that it adds. Now, in some songs, you'll find that the motion is added and is really important through guitars, through saxes, through vocals, through any kind of overdubbed instrument, and usually it's not something in the rhythm section with the bass and drums. In this case, the bass has a special place, in that, yes, it does add the foundation, but also the movement of the song, and we really miss it. There are many songs where you can mute the bass and just turn the bottom up on the kick drum, and you won't even miss the bass all that much. In this case, you miss it because of the movement. Let's listen one more time.
Sometimes I didn't rest at all. I've been shifted, lifted, up sky high, lost on a waterfall.
So the bass is the most important element in this song, and that's what we're going to emphasize. Now keep in mind that every song has its own most important element, and you have to go through and listen to each one to find out which is the most important for that particular song, that particular arrangement. To sum things up, you have to listen to each of the mix's elements to discover exactly which one drives the song. Once that element is found, make sure it's emphasized to take your mix to the next level. Before we can talk about how to make a great mix, it's good to be aware of signs of one that isn't that great. In this video, I'm going to show you some mixing characteristics to avoid to keep your mix from becoming amateur sounding. First of all, avoid a mix that has no contrast. That means the same ambient texture as in the same reverb is used on every instrument at the same level throughout the entire song. Avoid a mix that has no focal point. That's a mix where there are holes where nothing is brought forward to hold the listener's attention. Avoid a mix that's noisy. Clicks, hums, extraneous noises, count-offs, and sometimes lip smacks and breaths are all signs of an amateur mix. Avoid a mix that lacks clarity and punch. That's a mix where the instruments aren't distinct and the low end is either too weak or too big. Avoid a mix that sounds distant. The mix sounds distant because too much reverb or other effects have been used. Avoid a mix where the element levels are inconsistent. That's a mix where the instrument levels vary from balanced to soft to too loud, and certain lyrics can't be distinguished. Avoid a mix where the sounds are dull and uninteresting. That means generic, dated, or often heard sounds are used. There's a difference between using something because it's hip and new and using it because everyone else is using it. So those are some of the things that make an amateur-sounding mix. The essence of mixing is the balance between instruments or mix elements. No matter how good you are at other aspects of the mixing process, if you don't get the balance right, you don't have a good mix. Before we begin mixing, let's look at some of the balancing concepts that are important to grasp. There are a number of places to start your mix from, which we'll explore in subsequent videos. There is no right or wrong way to build a mix. Wherever you start your mix from, keep in mind that the mix bus level will get louder and louder with every instrument entrance. It's best to begin your mix with the mix bus meter, or the master meters, reading at about -10 dB, regardless of what instrument you start off with. With each instrument that enters at the same level as the current mix, the master mix meter will increase about 3 dB. Finally, remember that the sound of every drum will change anywhere from a little to a lot when a new drum or cymbal is added to the mix due to the leakage of the other drums into the mic. In the next series of movies, we'll explore all the aspects of building your mix, but remember that these principles will apply regardless of where your mix starts from. Whenever there are 2 or more instruments in a mix element like a drum kit, it's best to assign them to a subgroup in order to make any level adjustments easier. In this video, I'm going to show you how to assign your drum channels to a subgroup and why using one can be helpful. So the first thing we're going to do is insert a subgroup, but in order to do that, we'll first go to the last channel in the group of channels that we want to go into that subgroup. So in this case, it's room, and this is the room mic, and you'll see why we do this in a second. Now we come up to track, and we say new. We want this to be a stereo subgroup, and the reason why is we want to pan the drums across a stereo soundstage. Therefore, we need a stereo subgroup. So we don't want an audio track, we want an aux input track. Now watch where the subgroup is created. It comes up right after room. If you didn't select room, it would have randomly selected a place to put it, and probably it would have been down at the right-hand end of your mix window. So you would have had to move it. This is just saving you an extra step. So now this is called aux1. What we want to do is rename it. I'm going to right-click on the mouse, which brings up a window, and say rename. And we're going to call this drums, but I'm going to put this in caps. What I like to do is put all of my subgroups in caps to make it easier to differentiate between input channels and the subgroups. If you take notice, in this case, there's a lot of input channels. In fact, the descriptions are already in caps, and probably what I would do normally is go through those and actually retitle them so they would be in small case. So with just a glance, you'd be able to see what was a drum subgroup in this case. The next thing we want to do is select an input path. We're going to come up to the input section of the channel, which is here, and now it says no input. What we're going to do is select an input. In this case, it says drum sub. And the reason why it says that, it's because it was already pre-titled in a layout. Now, normally this would say something like bus 1 and 2, or you can select any bus you want, bus 23 and 24, bus 12 and 13, whatever you like. Now we want to go to all of the input channels and select the signal path so they're sending directly to this drum subgroup. So we'll come over here and we'll select our first channel, which is the kick in. Now we're going to select all the other channels as well. And the way we do that is we do shift, click. These are all the other channels that are going to be sent to that subgroup. And there's a reason why we do this. We can assign all of those channels all at once. And the way we do that is we hit the Option key and the Shift key. We go to our output assignment. We're going to say bus. And in this case, again, it says the drum sub, but it could very well just say bus 19 and 20, bus 1 and 2. Click it. And now if you take notice, everything that was selected has changed. So all of those channels are assigned to that drum subgroup. The reason why we want the subgroup in the first place is it makes it very easy for us to change the whole drum kit with just one fader. By moving this fader up and down, we're able to change the complete balance of the drum kit against everything else in the mix. And that's what makes this very, very powerful. The other thing that makes it powerful is we can insert a EQ or a compressor into the signal path of the drum subgroup, and it will affect everything that's assigned to that subgroup. So with just one EQ, we can EQ the whole drum kit if we'd like, or with just one compressor, we can compress everything if we'd like. It's not necessarily the best way, but it is a way to do it. So that's how you create a drum subgroup. In a subgroup, all of the channels of the group are assigned to a subgroup fader, which is then assigned to the master mix bus. This gives you a lot more control over the level of the drum kit. Many mixers like to build their drum mix from the bass drum because it's part of the foundation of the song. In this segment, I'm going to show you how to start with the bass drum first and build your mix from there. The first thing we're going to do is take notice that there's two kick drums. It says kick in and kick out. That means that there was a microphone inside the bass drum and there was another one that was outside the bass drum. So the very first one that we'll raise is the kick in inside the bass drum because it's a little bit more aggressive sounding. And now we'll bring the kick out. And you'll find this has a lot more bottom to it. You can hear the low end come in. If we have too much, that's all we have is low end. Now the best way to do this is just bring it up enough that you can barely hear it. And that's about the right level. Okay, now that we got that level and we can look over here, we see on the master, it's going about -10 on its peaks That's a good place for it to be. And now we've already assigned a subgroup. Now we're going to engage it on the kick drum. And the reason for that is now with one fader, we can move both of those channels up and down in level and still maintain the relative balance between them. So now that we got the sound on the kick drum, now we're going to bring the snare up to about the same level. Now it doesn't mean it's the same level on the channel fader. It means it's the same level that we're listening to, the same relative level. So bring the snare top up. Let's go from the beginning again. And once again, we have two mics on the snare. We have one on the top and one on the bottom. One on the bottom usually gives you a bit more snap because all it is capturing the sound of the snares themselves. So let's bring that up. It's about the same as with the kick out. Bring it up until we can just about hear it. Here we go. If we bring it up too loud, it gets very trashy sounding. And that's not what we want. Here's what it sounds like without it. You can hear it. Just adds a little bit of EQ to it, a little bit of top end. There's the sound of both of them. Now if you look over on the master fader, you can see how all of a sudden it went from about -10 to about -7 on peaks. And this is what happens. If you have the same level of two instruments, you'll get an increase of around 3 dB. The next thing I like to do is bring the overheads up. And the reason why is the overheads will add to the overall sound of the drum kit. There are two types of overheads. You have overheads that are used just as cymbal mics, so they're really close to the cymbals, and then you have other overheads that are up higher trying to capture the overall kit. Either way, you'll do about the same thing. Bring them up until you can just hear the cymbals on cymbal crashes or ride cymbals. Let's go back to a place where there's... There we go. And we'll bring the second one. We're not going to pan them yet, we're just going to bring them up. We don't want those cymbals too loud, but we do want to be able to hear them. We want to hear them with definition. The next thing we're going to do is bring the toms up. Now, one of the things that will happen is the toms will change the sound of the entire drum kit. That's not a bad thing, but it happens all the time. So you can't fall in love with what you have right here without the toms, and then all of a sudden have the sound change and then worry about the fact that it's changed. It's a fact of life. It is going to change. So here we go. Bring the middle tom up first. And you can hear how everything has changed already. Mute it. You can hear the ring of the tom. You can hear more low end of the kick. You can hear more hi-hat. Watch this, we bring the other ones up. Especially this one, you can really hear it on this one. On the floor tom. Now once again, this is normal. This is the way it should sound. It's not going to sound as clean as you might think. Now let's go back and listen again. And what we want to do is go to a place in the song where it has a lot of tom fills already. So you center around a tom fill, and what you're trying to do is find a place where you can balance the three of them together, or the two of them, or the five of them, or however many toms you have. You want to balance them so they're all the same level. So now we've already set our memory at a place where there are tom fills so we can hear them. Okay, let's go again. Have a listen. Once again, what we're trying to do is make sure that we have a nice balance between them. we can hear them distinctly. We don't want them too loud, but yet we don't want them too quiet. We'll bring them down just a little bit so they're more in context. There we go. Now we can hear all three of them. Pretty good level. We can hear the cymbals. Now take notice, without even bringing up the hi-hat channel, we can already hear the hi-hat fairly well. Sometimes this level right here is just enough for the song, but sometimes you need it a little bit louder. Sometimes you want to actually add to the definition of the hi-hat, and that's when you bring it up. Once again, what we're going to do is we're going to bring it up just loud enough until we begin to hear that definition. There we go, on the hi-hat. See, if it's too loud, it overpowers the rest of the drums. Bring it down just until we hear that definition happen. There's without it. There's with it. And it's just a little bit of definition. And that's about the right place for it. Now remember, these are only starting places. And as we bring more instruments in, we're going to tweak all of these levels. Also, as we EQ the drums, as we compress the drums, as we add effects, that's going to affect the level as well. So we're going to do minute tweaks as we go along. There's one last channel, it's the room channel. Now in this case, there's only one room mic that was recorded. Sometimes there's two, so it's in stereo. Sometimes there's three of them, so there's left, center, right. What the room mic does is it gives you a little ambience on the drum kit, first of all, which is pretty cool, but it also gives a little bit of glue to the sound. So let's bring it in and have a listen. Once again, just about the time you begin to hear it is about enough, although I'm going to take it beyond that so you can hear what it sounds like when there's too much. So that's way too much room mic. And if we solo it, you can hear it sounds pretty trashy just by itself. But without it, the drum set doesn't sound as good. Right about there is about right. Now also take notice what happens over on our master fader. Let's go again and watch what happens on the drum fills. And you can see it's almost up at 0 dB. And this is why having a drum subgroup is so powerful, because now we can control the level. All of those 11 channels can be controlled by this one fader. And we can bring it down to where everything fits well in the mix. To sum it all up, your mix bus is going to get louder and louder with every drum track entrance. Don't forget, it's best to begin your mix with the mix bus meter reading at about minus 10 dB or so. The sound of every drum is going to change anywhere from a little to a whole lot when a new drum or cymbal is added to the mix, and this is because of the leakage that you're going to have on those tracks. And finally, each drum that enters at the same level as the current mix is going to make the master mix meter increase by about 3 dB. The snare drum is the pulse of the song, which is why so many mixers like to build their drum mix around it. In this movie, I'm going to show you how to start with the snare first and build your mix from there. When we start with the snare drum, usually what happens is it winds up being more prominent in the mix. Now, you might want that, and that's a reason why you want to start with the snare. Many people just feel more comfortable starting with it because it is the pulse of the song. Either way, here's how we do it. You'll take notice that there's two snare tracks, one with the snare top and one with the snare bottom. The snare top means there's a mic on the top of the snare, and the snare bottom means there's a mic underneath the snare that's capturing the sound of the snares themselves. Just as when we started with the kick, we're going to bring the snare top channel up so it reads about minus 10 on the master meters. Now it might go a little above and it might go a little below minus 10, but it's where the average is. Somewhere around minus 10 is good. If it's a little above, it's okay. If it's a little below, that's okay too. Now we're going to bring the bottom of the snare, or as it says, snare bot, which is the snare bottom mic. We're going to bring that up until we can just about hear it. If we mute it, we can hear the difference. Now, since before we created a group for the snare, now we're going to engage that. And that means that with movement of one fader, we can move the level of both of them up and down. Now we're going to introduce the kick into the mix. We're going to use the kick in channel. That means it's the microphone that's inside the kick drum. We're going to use that one first because it has the most definition. We're going to bring that up so it's about the same level as the snare top mic. Now when I say the same level, what that means is not the same level on the fader, but the same level, relatively speaking, what you're listening to. So it's what you're hearing. They should be about equal in level, and not the channels being equal in how far up or down they are. We're going to do the same thing with the kick out channel that we did with the snare bottom channel. We're going to bring it up until it's just about to the level that we can hear it. If it's too loud, it's going to sound too big. It's going to overpower the kick in mic and the snare drum. So we're going to bring it up until we can just about barely hear it. It's easier to hear when you have bigger speakers that go lower. So you have to be careful with this if you're listening on headphones or if you're listening on very, very small speakers like computer speakers, because it's very easy to bring this up so it's too loud and it overpowers everything else. If that's the case, just bring it up so you can barely hear it. And in some cases, if you can't really tell, you're better off not to use it at all. Now that we have both kicks in, what we're going to do is engage the group that we created previously. So now that allows us to change the level of the kick drums with just one fader. Now I'm going to bring the overhead channels in. What that's going to do is it's going to change the sound of the kick and the snare. But the real secret here is to bring it in just enough that you can hear the sound of the cymbals. What you're looking for is some sort of definition. In order to do this, I'm going to go to a memory location that I've already noted that has a lot of cymbals. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to bring up my memory palette, and that's Command number 5. It brings in the memory locations. I'm going to hit drum fill, and it's going to take us exactly where we need to go. Now let's listen without listening to the overheads. You can hear the cymbals, but they're very subdued. Now we're going to bring up the left overhead so we can hear that with more definition. Let's bring up the right overhead as well. We're still listening in mono, by the way. We'll get into panning in the next series of movies. Now you can hear the definition of those crash cymbals, and that's exactly what we want. Now let's move on to the toms. First thing I'm going to do is bring up tom number 2, that's the middle tom, and listen to how everything changes with that tom. All of a sudden, the sound of the kick and the sound of the snare is going to change, just by the fact that the channel is up. Listen to tom number 1, the same thing. We'll bring it up to about the same level. Now you can really hear it there. There's a lot of rumble from that tom. The kick drum and the snare drum are actually setting that tom off. It's actually ringing as we're going. That's perfectly normal. And what you're going to hear is a lot of different leakage coming from those tom mics, which is going to change the sound of the rest of the drums. But in fact, that's normal. What we're going to try to do now is get the level of the toms. So when we hear that fill, all of the toms are going to be at about the same level when they're hit. Here we go. Let's listen to that again. Let's listen one more time. If you take notice as we listen, you can still hear the hi-hat even though the hat channel is still at 0. Now sometimes that's perfect for the song, but other times you like to have it either louder in the mix or you want to hear more definition. So let's just listen to it without the hat channel even in the mix. Listen for the hi-hat. Now let's bring the hi-hat in. Mute it for a second. The idea here is to bring it in just enough that you can hear the definition. Finally, there's one channel that's still not in the mix, and that's the room channel. Sometimes there's only one room mic, sometimes there's 2 for stereo, sometimes there's 3, which are left, center, and right. The idea of the room mics is to make it sound bigger and fatter and fuller and add some glue that you can't get any other way. Once again, the ideal level is just about when you can hear it. If it gets too loud, the sound of the drums begin to sound trashy. If it's too low, you won't hear it at all. Let's bring that up now. The idea here is that room mic will not only give you some glue, but it gives you some extra ambience from the room. The better the room sounds, the better the ambient sounds. So that's how we build a mix around the snare drum. Usually when you build it this way, the snare will be more prominent in the mix than if you started with another instrument. Keep in mind that it's all going to change as we add more instruments, as we add compression, as we add EQ, even as we add effects like reverb and even some delay. Those will all help change the balance of what we have here. But this is the beginning balance, and it's where we start from, and everything else will be tweaked from there. Many mixers feel that when they build their mix from the kick or snare, their tom fills get lost when they enter the song. That's why some mixers prefer to build their drum mix from the toms and build the rest of the mix around them. In this movie, I'll show you just how to do that. So in order to start from the toms, the first thing we're going to have to do is find a place in the song where the toms are playing. What I'm going to do is hit Command number 5. That's going to bring up our memory locations. And I've already selected a memory location where the drum fills happen. So we come down here to drum fill, click on that, and now we should have a nice drum fill to start from. The first thing I'll do is I'll bring up tom number 1. Doesn't matter which tom you start from in this case. I'll just bring up tom number 1 because it says number 1. We'll be able to adjust it a little bit later. The big thing is we want to be able to hear this and all the other toms without worrying about the rest of the mix first. Now let's bring the second tom in, tom number 2. And the idea here is to get it balanced so tom number 1, tom number 2 are about the same level. Let's play that again. More time. Now let's bring the floor tom in. Once again, the idea is to get it so it's at the same level. Let's tweak it a little. Play it again. It's about right. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to group all these 3 together. So what I'll do is I'll select the floor tom, then I'll shift click on the other 2 tom channels. And I'll go up to track and say, let's add a group. You can see currently in group, there's floor tom, tom 1 and tom 2. And let's call the group toms. Makes sense. And now click OK. Now we have a tom group. And you can see that with one fader, I can move the level of all 3 channels up and down as needed. So now we're going to start with the kick, although you can start with any other drum channel that you like. In this case, we'll do the kick. We'll try to bring it up so it's about the same level as the toms. Let's hear that one more time. Now let's bring our snare in. Once again, we're trying to bring it up so it's relatively the same level as our kick and as the toms as well. Now we'll bring our overheads in. Once again, the idea here is to bring it in so you can hear those cymbals, either the crash cymbal or the ride cymbal. You're looking for definition in the cymbals. You don't want them to be too loud, you don't want them to be too soft, but you want to be able to hear them clearly. Let's bring the right one in. Once again, we're listening in mono, so you're not going to hear it as right and left. We'll get into panning in another series. If you listen to the hi-hat there, you could hear it fairly clearly without the hi-hat channel even being on. It's at 0 right now. So if we were to lift it up, the whole idea is to bring it up so, again, we have some definition. We don't necessarily hear it getting louder as much as we hear it getting more defined. That's the whole trick. And finally, the room channel. There could be as many as 3 room channels on any given mix. One would obviously be mono, 2 would be left and right, which would be stereo, and sometimes there's even 3, which is left, center, right. The whole idea of the room channels is to give the drum kit some ambience and to give it some glue. There is no other way to really do it other than with the room channel. This is a mic that's set out in the room anywhere from 3 to maybe a dozen feet away. Let's listen again from the beginning. So that's how we build a mix around the tom fills. As you can hear, the toms are out in front, and they're not going to be buried when you use this method. Remember to start with the master mix bus at about minus 10 dB, since the master level will increase with every drum that enters into the mix. Overhead mics are placed further away from the cymbals than normal cymbal miking, and are meant to pick up the overall sound of the drum kit. That's why using the overheads to build your drum mix is a completely different approach to building a mix any other way. In this movie, I'll show you when this method is possible and how it's done. The first thing to know about building a mix from the overheads is there's a difference between the overheads and cymbal mics. Cymbal mics are placed close to the cymbals and they're only trying to pick up cymbals. Overheads are placed above the drum kit, and the idea is to pick up the entire drum kit. And usually this depends upon the sound of the room and how big the room is. The bigger the room, the better this works. So sometimes this will work great, other times it won't. If you have a small room and you try to do overheads, the reflections from the ceiling sometimes can just make it sound bad. So just the fact that you place the mics over the drum kit won't necessarily mean that it will sound great. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to bring the left overhead up until the master mix meters read about minus 10 or so. And we're going to bring the right overhead as well. Don't forget we're listening in mono still. We'll cover panning of drums and panning of other instruments in a later series of movies. Now from here on in, every time we bring a piece of the drum kit in, what we're trying to do is make it sound more defined. We're not necessarily trying to put it out in front of the overhead sound, we're just trying to make that particular piece of the drum kit more defined sounding. Let's do the same thing with the snare. And as you can see, we have the kick and the snare grouped together as we talked about in previous movies. Next thing is we're going to bring the toms in. In order for us to do that, we have to go to a place in the song that has some tom fills. So actually, I'm going to hit Command or Control 5 to bring up the memory locations window. And I already have a drum fill marked. So I'll hit drum fill. And now we'll hit play, which is a space bar, and bring those toms up. Let's hear it again. The next thing we'll do is we'll bring up the hat with the idea of just trying to add to the definition. Finally, we'll bring the room channel up. There's only one room channel in this case. Many times there's 2 for stereo, and sometimes there's even 3, left, center, and right. And the idea here is it's going to add to the ambience, and it's going to add a little bit to the glue. But again, we'll just bring it up enough that we can hear it. So that's how we build a mix from the overhead mics, which are placed further away from the drums than normal cymbal mics. As you can hear, it's a completely different sound than when we started from the kick, or we started from the snare, or when we started from the toms, for instance. The idea with this technique is that the main drum sound comes from the overheads, and the drum mics just fill in the sound around it. One of the most important yet overlooked parts of a drum mix is checking the phase of the drums. This is important because not only will an out-of-phase channel suck the low end out of a mix, but it will get more difficult to fix as the mix progresses. In this video, I'm going to show you how to check the phase of the drums and select the correct settings. So the first thing is there's 2 reasons why a drum channel, or any kind of channel for that matter, can be out of phase. The first thing, it could be a miswired cable, and this could either be a mic cable that was wired backwards, because a lot of people wire their own cables, save a little bit of money, or it could be because during a studio install, the installer didn't have his first cup of coffee in the morning and didn't wear his glasses or something that day, and things were miswired. So just that one cable can cause things to be out of phase. The other reason why you can have something out of phase is because you have 2 microphones that are very, very close to listening to the exact same sound source. And when that happens, you have a potential phase problem that happens, and we'll see how that works in a little bit. So the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that I have a plug-in on each channel. And usually a plug-in will have the ability to allow you to switch the phase. So for instance, over here on this compressor, we have a little button here, which is a 0 with the line through it. And what that is a symbol of phase. So in order for us to really hear it, what we're going to do in this case is we're going to listen to the kick drums by themselves, but we want them to be exactly the same level. So here's the kick drum. Here's the second one. Want them to be about the exact same level. Again, not the fader level. We're looking at the master mix meter instead. Now watch when I change the phase button here. When it's blue, it's out of phase. There's more low end when it's not selected than when it is selected. What that means is both channels are in phase, and the best selection here is the one that gives you the most low end. We're always going for the selection that has the most low end. The next thing we're going to do is go to our overheads where you can really hear it. So there's 2 overheads. There's a left and right overhead. We're going to solo those up, listen to them. I've inserted a 1-band EQ across each of these channels. I don't much care about the EQ. What I do care about is the ability to change the phase. And once again, on the input here, we have a selector to be able to change from one side of the phase to the other. Now listen to what it sounds like when we select it. pretty dramatic. The selection that we want is the one that gives us the most low end. That's when it's in phase. If we have something that's out of phase, you're going to have low end that gets sucked out. It won't be all the frequencies, it will be some of them. So now what we'll actually do is we'll go through each channel, we'll hit that phase button and we'll see if there's change, and if there is, we'll select the position that gives us the most low end. Don't hear much of a difference there, we'll move on. No difference there either. Don't hear any difference there. And we'll keep on doing this. We'll go through all the channels and we'll flip the phase. Sometimes what we'll do, if it starts to sound funny, you can solo a few channels up and listen to what it sounds like there. But you'll know if there's something very much out of phase, you'll hear it right away as soon as you hit that selector switch. Not only will an out-of-phase channel suck the low end out of a mix, but it will get increasingly more difficult to fix as the mix progresses. No amount of EQ or compression or anything else can fix it. Where once upon a time the bass amp was always mic'd, today most basses are taken direct. That being said, sometimes both the amp mic and the direct signals are recorded on separate tracks as well, so that the bass sound has the best combination of bottom end and clarity. In this video, I'm going to show you how to balance the direct and mic'd bass signals. So the direct and the mic'd bass signals are going to sound completely different. The DI is generally going to have more definition and a little more high end, and the mic'd bass cabinet is going to sound a bit more fuller and rounder. So let's listen to them both. Here's the DI. We'll go back to the beginning and listen to it again, and here's the mic'd bass cabinet. Now, generally speaking, when we add them together, we get a combination that sounds better than either one. But not always. Sometimes it doesn't work on the track, and sometimes it works great. But some combination is usually perfect. The first thing we're going to do, though, is we're going to check the phase just like we did with the drums. So, if you take notice, I have an EQ inserted on both of the channels. So I'm going to bring one up. I only need one. I'm going to play it. And I'm going to flip the phase. Now you can really hear the difference when the phase is flipped there. Sometimes people actually like that flipped phase sound, and they'll use that in a track. Not all the time, but sometimes it's perfect for a certain track. Most of the time, though, you prefer to have the selection that gives you the most bass, and that's where we're going to leave it. In this case, it's going to be deselected, and we're going to just keep it without the phase switched on either of the channels. Now, in order for us to figure out the correct balance, we can do this two different ways. One way is we can raise the DI, have a listen to it, and gradually bring the bass cabinet in until we get the fullness that we need. Now, another way that we can do it that sometimes works even better is listen in the track to what the bass sounds like. Just the bass DI, then bring in the bass cabinet. So let's have a listen. We'll bring in not all the instruments, but a lot of them. That's just the bass DI. Let's bring in some of the bass cabinet now. Now the idea here is to make it full, but we don't want to make it so full that it overpowers the kick drum or any other instrument for that matter. One channel will sound fatter and the other more distinct. So choose the one that sounds best in the track and add the other to taste. If you listen to hit records from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the bass was the foundation of the songs, not the drums. A lot of old school engineers still like to start from the bass, then build their mix around it. In this video, I'm going to show you how to do just that. First thing we're going to do, just like we did before when we were mixing from the drums, we're going to bring the bass level up so it's about -10 on the master mix meters. I was going to peak a little above and go a little below. This is just an average. Now let's bring the kick so they're up just about the same level. Now take notice, when the level is the same between the kick and the bass, you're going to see the master mix level meters increase by about 3 dB. So that means if we started around 10, it's going to be somewhere around -7. So take a look, that's just about where we're at now. Okay, now we're going to bring the snare up so it's just about the same level as well. Now we're going to proceed with building our mix just as we did before with the drums, only now we're going to build everything around the bass sound. In order to hear the overheads and the cymbals, what we're going to do is go again to where our drum fills are. So we're going to hit Command or Control number 5 to bring up our memory location window and select drum fill. That should take us to the place in the song, and let's build a mix from there. Go back, now we'll bring our toms up. And now let's bring the hi-hat in. Once again, when we bring the hi-hat in, what we're trying to do is just increase the definition. And now finally we'll bring the room sound in, once again, just to the point where we can hear it. Now what this does is it makes sure that the bass is always up in front of the mix when we build it this way. Now again, everything is going to change somewhat as soon as we begin to EQ, as soon as we begin to compress the various channels, and even when we begin to add some effects. But those should be minor tweaks from where we're at right now. There's a school of thought that since the vocal is usually the most important element in the mix, the entire mix should be built around it. In this video, I'm going to show you how to build your mix by starting with the vocal first. So just like with all the other mixes, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to bring the vocal up so the master mix bus levels read about -10 dB.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, and teased, but never like this before.
Once again, that's just an average. It'll peak above, it'll be a little below. You just want to get it so it's around -10, just so you have some headroom left for all the other instruments when they come in. Now we're going to bring the kick drum so it's about the same level. Doesn't have to be exactly, but you're trying to get it in the ballpark.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, and teased, but never like this before. You got me trucking.
Now we're going to bring the snare drum up as well as all the other drums, just so we can hear them, and they're roughly the same level as the vocal. We never want to go louder than the vocal. If anything, we want to go a little bit less than the vocal.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, but never like this before. You got me tracking behind you, running on my knees, pleading and begging for more. I say I heard a lot of sweet talk.
Once again, in order to check the overheads so we can hear the cymbals and to check the toms, we want to go to a place in the song where we can hear both cymbal crashes or ride cymbal, or we can hear tom fills. So we're going to hit the Command or Control key and number 5 to bring up the memory locations window. Once again, we'll come over to our memory location that has the drum fill, and we'll listen from there.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, never.
So now we bring our overheads up so we can hear that crash cymbal. Now we're going to bring our toms in so we make sure that we can hear all the toms as well. And once again, you can see that the kick and the snare and the toms are all grouped together as we talked about in previous videos.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, never like this before.
Now we're going to bring our hi-hat up.
Trucking behind you, running on my knees, pleading and begging for more.
Once again, we're bringing that up so we can hear the definition on the hi-hat. We're not bringing it up for level so much, just so it becomes more defined. Now we're going to bring the room mic up as well. So once again, it's going to add some glue to the drum mix.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, never like this before.
Last but not least, we're going to bring the bass channel in. Now the bass channel is going to come up about the same level as the kick and the snare. A little more, a little less. It depends on the song. It depends on the sound of the bass.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, never like this before. You got me trucking behind you, running on my knees, pleading and begging for more.
Now you can hear what happened. No matter what we do, the vocal is always front and center. By bringing it in first, we make sure that it never gets buried in the mix. One of the things that happens frequently, if we build a mix from the drums or build a mix from the bass or build a mix from any other instrument and bring in the vocal last, which a lot of mixers do, sometimes there's no space for it and they really have a hard time fitting it into the mix so you can hear it clearly. So by building the mix around the vocal, you make sure that it's always the center of attention and never gets buried. This approach keeps your vocal front and center in the mix. The balance between the bass and drums is critical because it provides the power of the mix. The key is to make the bass, kick, and snare work together to provide the foundation and the pulse of the song, yet still be able to hear each one distinctly. In this video, I'm going to show you how that's done. So now that you have a drum mix that you've gotten either from using any of the approaches before, from starting with the kick, from starting with the toms, from starting with the overhead, from starting with the snare, now that you have it, we're going to put it aside for a second and mute it, and we're just going to listen to the bass. We're going to bring that bass up so it's about -10 on the master mix bus meters. And once again, it's not going to be exactly -10. It's going to peak a little above it, it's going to go a little below it. And a little bit later when we get into compression, we're going to look to see how we can make that bass sound a little more even so we can keep it closer to -10. But for now, it's okay if it drifts above or below. So now that we got the bass sound right around -10, now what we're going to do is we're going to unmute the drums, but we just want to listen to the kick drums. So we're going to mute all of the other drums, just listen to the kick. And we're going to mute the bass as well. The whole idea here is we want the kick to be somewhere around -10 as well. And again, it's going to drift a little above, a little below. Now let's unmute the bass. These should be about the same level. Now let's unmute the snare drum. Now the whole idea here is you should be able to hear all three at about the same level. Now we're going to listen to all the other drums, and especially listen to see if when we put all the drums in, if the bass gets masked in any way. if all of a sudden it seems like it's diminished the level or the definition is diminished. So let's unmute them all and have a listen, and we're going to listen at the drum fill. The whole thing here is you ask yourself if you can hear the kick and the snare and the bass distinctly. If you can't, don't worry about it, because what we're going to do a little bit later is we're going to fix that with EQ and with compression. But right now we just want to get it in a ballpark where all three sound like they're about at the same level. After the rhythm section is balanced, it's time to add the rest of the instruments. The order in which that happens will depend upon the song and the arrangement, so let's look at our sample song as an example. So the idea here is we're going to bring the instruments in just to the level that we can hear them, so we don't overpower the rhythm section. The first thing we're going to bring in is the organ, because I like to bring the keyboards in first, if there are keyboards in the song. You can start with any other instrument that you like, but for me, the keyboards seem to work because a lot of times they work as a pad, so they're kind of a bed instrument in the song. Next instrument I'm going to bring in is guitar number 1. In this case it just says guitar. So we're going to bring this in once again to the point that we can hear it, but it doesn't overpower the rhythm section. Now we're going to bring in guitar number 2. Same thing, we're going to bring it in just loud enough that we can hear it, not too loud that it overpowers the rhythm section or any of the other instruments for that matter. Now guitar 1 and guitar 2 sound very, very similar, and it's very difficult to even differentiate between the two. We're going to fix that a little bit later with the EQ, but for now we're going to leave it just the way it is. Now let's bring in the vocal. Now the vocal actually can be in several different places in terms of balance. On a normal pop song, it's way out in front of the rhythm section. It's the most prominent featured instrument in the mix. In a rock song, or in a song where you like the most power of the mix, usually it's back farther in the mix. So let's bring this up to where it's like a typical pop mix, where it's up in front.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, but never like this before. You got me tracking behind you, running on my knees, pleading and begging for more.
Now you can hear this is just a little bit on top of the rhythm section. It's still powerful, but what you really hear first and foremost is that vocal, and of course you hear this in a lot of pop songs. If we want to emphasize the power of the band, usually we'll bring that vocal back somewhat into the mix. Not so much that we can't distinguish the words, but far enough back that the power of the mix is up in front.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, but never like this before. You got me tracking behind you, running on my knees, pleading and begging for more. I said I heard a lot of sweet talk in my time.
So now we have it back farther in the mix, and we can even bring it back farther. There are some hit songs where you really have to listen hard to hear the words, and that's on purpose. The vocal is brought back far enough in the mix so you hear more of the power of the rhythm section. Either way is okay. It depends upon the song and it depends upon the mix that you're going for. Now let's bring the background vocals in. The background vocals start in the B section of the song, so let's go there. We'll hit Command or Control 5, bring up our memory locations window, and B section, close our memory locations window, and here we go.
I heard a lot of sweet talk in my time, but your pretty words is a mess on my mind. It's like a never, oh never like this before.
So the background vocals are usually a little bit behind the lead vocals, as they are right now. Sometimes they're equal to the lead vocals in level, but they're never above the lead vocal, or very rarely. So we want to start with them right about there. Now, the last thing we're going to bring in is the percussion. In this case, it's the tambourine. And once again, we're going to bring this up so we can just about hear it in the mix.
I heard a lot of sweet talk in my time, but your pretty words was a mess on my mind. It's like a never, oh, never like this before. I've been sweating.
This is the balance of a rough mix. And generally speaking, it's only a place to start. We're going to tweak it from here. It'll get tweaked as we add compression. It'll get tweaked as we add EQ to the instruments to make them more defined and bigger. And it'll get tweaked when we add effects. So to sum it up, be careful that the instruments aren't too loud so that the rhythm section stays powerful. Also remember that in pop songs, the vocals are usually the loudest element in the mix, but to emphasize the groove, decrease the vocal level. There are some mixers that just push up all the faders and mix with everything in the mix from the beginning. The theory is that everything will be in the mix anyway, so you might as well start with it all in as soon as you can. In this movie, I'm going to show you the advantages of mixing this way, and we'll look at an example of how this technique is done. The advantage of this method is that by hearing all the instruments and vocals, you're able to make an aural space for everything. If you insert one instrument at a time, you begin to run out of space, and frequently you have to go back to the beginning just to make sure everything fits in together properly. Downside to this is it might not have the power of the previous mixes. So the first thing is we'll just bring all the faders up. In this case, we have our subgroup faders that we're going to be mixing from just to make things a little bit easier. And we're just going to randomly bring our faders up here. Now what we're going to do is just gradually balance everything. And the downside of this here is that there's no particular rhyme or reason. Before we were saying, let's start at -10 on the kick or -10 on the bass or whatever instrument you might start with. In this case, everything is in, and we're going to rely on our intuition to kind of balance things. And this could work for a lot of people. If you're new, it's not really the best place to start from, but it's one way to do it, and I'm going to show you how.
I heard a lot of sweet talk in my time, but your pretty words was a mess on my mind. It's like a never, oh, never like this before. I've been swept, kept up all night. Sometimes I didn't rest at all. I've been shifted, lifted up sky high, lost on a waterfall. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's rough. Just can't seem to ever get enough. It's like a never, oh, never like this before. Let me tell you about your love, baby.
Now there's two things here. The first thing is the master mix meters have peaked.
I heard a lot of sweet talk in my time, but your pretty words.
They're running hot, and you can see the red LEDs, which means that we've peaked. Now, this is one of the problems that you have when you're mixing like this, is the fact that you're going to have very, very high levels most of the time. We can fix that. That's not a problem. First thing is to get rid of our overload LEDs and just click on them and they go away. And next thing is we'll just bring the master down a little bit so we won't have that problem. But now you can hear the balance is pretty good. I got the balance together because I'm fairly experienced and know how to do this and I know the song. But if you're just starting, it may be more confusing than it needs to be for you. It's just a method of how to do it. But really what I'm doing here is I'm concentrating first on the rhythm section, starting with the drums, then the bass, then really the vocal, and I'm trying to fit everything around that. Let's have a listen.
I heard a lot of sweet talk in my time, but your pretty words was a mess on my mind. It's like a never, oh, never like this before. I've been swept, kept up all night. Sometimes I didn't rest at all.
Now Once again, we'd call this more of a rough mix than anything else. And obviously, if we're going to do a final mix, we do everything a lot slower, but it's just an example of how you can build a mix with all the instruments in from the beginning. And once again, it's just a method that some people have. Not many, but some people do it this way. So that's how you build a mix with all the elements in from the beginning. But be aware that the mix may not have the same power as the other mix techniques. With harmony vocals, the balance is crucial in order to get the correct blend and impact. In this movie, I'm going to show you how to mix harmony vocals so they have a great blend and work well with the other elements of the song. Usually the highest harmony vocal is the one that cuts the most. And as we get lower and lower, each one tends to get more lost in the mix. So, just like with the drums, we're going to start from the bottom up with the lowest vocal first, and then build on that. So I happen to know that BGV, or background vocal number 1, is the lowest vocal, so let's bring that up and let's start from there.
Soul searching, soul searching.
Okay, now let's bring the second vocal up. The middle vocal happens to be the lead vocal as well. This is not uncommon. Many times you'll have the lead vocal in the middle of a 3-part harmony with the lower vocal on the bottom and a higher vocal on top. Sometimes it works where the lead vocal is actually on the bottom and the 2 higher vocals are on top of that. But in this case, it's the lead vocal that's in the middle.
I'm a soul searching, soul searching, soul searching.
And what we're doing is we're bringing it up so it's just about the same level. If anything, we're keeping the lower background vocal, the lowest one, a little bit higher. And now let's bring the highest one in, which is BGV2, or background vocal number 2. Since it's the highest, it's usually the one that cuts the most. So this will be a little bit back in level from the other 2.
I'm a soul searching, soul searching, soul searching, soul searching.
You can hear the vocal is pretty good together, but really, we won't know until we listen in the track. Let's unsolo these and have a listen. Hear where we're at.
I'm a soul searching, soul searching, soul searching, soul searching, soul searching.
And there you have it. That's how you balance 3-part vocal harmonies. If you do it like you do the rhythm section from the bottom part up, you'll make sure that none of the vocal parts get lost in the mix. Remember that the middle vocal part is crucial to the harmony balance, and care should be taken that it's at the right level. One of the most taken for granted elements in mixing pertains to the placement of a sound element in the stereo field, otherwise known as panning. In this video, I'm going to show you how panning can create excitement by adding movement within the stereo field, as well as adding clarity to an instrument by moving it out of the way of other sounds. The first thing is a stereo provides a sense of spaciousness, and that's what panning is giving us. It's giving us the spaciousness, and as a result, we're also getting some clarity out of it as well. The thing about panning, though, is there are 3 main fields that we have, and that's hard left, hard right, and in the center. Now, what happens when we pan something in the center is the sound is coming out of both speakers at the same time in an equal amount, and that gives us a solid feel to the track. So what we try to do is anything with a lot of low end, we try to put into the middle. So for instance, listen to one track of the bass, which is the DI track. So if we put it in the center, it sounds very, very solid. As soon as we move it to the left or to the right, now we get the sense of spaciousness, but it doesn't sound quite the same anymore. And we can use this to our advantage, but usually we do that in other instruments rather than the bass. Now let's just listen with the track for a second, with the bass panned up the middle.
How could I do all the silly things that I do?
Now if we were to add the second bass track, the bass cabinet in, and listen to them both, we'll solo them both. Sounds pretty good. Now, as soon as we begin to pan them, though, all of a sudden we lose some power. Still sounds good, But there's just enough difference between the two tracks that we've gained some spaciousness, but we lost some power. Let's listen with the track.
Soul searching, I'm a soul searching.
That's one of the reasons why we don't pan things like kick drums and basses. In the early days of stereo, you might find some records where that happened, where on the left channel you might have the bass and on the right channel you might have the drums, but that was only because they had limited panning positions. They didn't have pan pots back then, and they were learning the trade. So you had a few of the Beatle records, for instance, that did that, but not many. Where panning does come in handy, though, is when we do something like panning the vocals or panning other instruments to stay out of the way of certain instruments. Now, let's just solo up our background vocals for a second.
Soul searching,
Now, everything is panned up the middle. And just listen to it for a second. It sounds pretty good.
soul searching, I'm a soul searching, I'm a soul searching. How could I say goodbye to you?
Now, if we were to pan these background vocals, hard left and hard right, have a listen to what it sounds like now.
Soul searching, I'm a soul searching, I'm a soul searching. How could I say goodbye to you?
Now, what we get is a sense of spaciousness, but what also happens is the vocals detach from one another. And what we want sometimes is we want all three vocals, in this case, to sound like a section. If we pan everything hard left, hard right, and up the center, then there's that detachment that doesn't actually quite work really well. But what happens if we just pan them a little? Let's pan 20% to one side, 20% to the other side. Now have a listen.
Soul searching, I'm a soul searching, I'm a soul searching. How could I say goodbye to you?
Now what that does is it gives us the best of both worlds. It gives us a space in the middle for that lead vocal. It moves the background vocals a little out of the way, plus it gives us some spaciousness. So that's the beauty of using the spaces in between hard left and hard right and the center, where we can get the best of both worlds. We can get the clarity, plus we can get spaciousness. So sometimes just a little bit of movement to the left or to the right makes a really big difference. The other thing we can do is listen to some guitars as well and how that works with guitars. So we'll come over here, and there's two guitar parts especially that we can listen to. Let's play it for a second and take notice they're panned up the middle. Now, it sounds pretty good, and we can hear the difference between both of them. But now, if we pan them just a little bit left and right, you can hear a big difference. All of a sudden, there'll be some clarity between them. Now, once again, we'll just go to 29, and guitar number 1 is actually in stereo. So what we'll do is we'll pan the left way far to the left and the right-hand channel just a little bit. Now, here's the beauty of a stereo instrument. We don't always have to pan it hard left and right. We can just pan it a little bit, and we can get the same spaciousness. And take a listen. And now you can hear that there's a lot more clarity between both. This also happens with stereo instruments, and let's listen for a second to the organ. This is a Hammond B3, and with the B3, it's being played through a Leslie tone cabinet, which has a rotating horn on the top and a rotating horn on the bottom. And what that does is it gives us a very unique stereo perspective. Let's just listen in mono for a second, and let's solo both of them. Have a listen. Now, let's pan them hard left and hard right, which is what a lot of people think right off. Well, I have it in stereo. Let me pan it hard left and hard right. Have a listen. Now, sometimes you can go too far with your panning, and in this case, this is one of those things where it's a good example, where when you pan it so far apart, all of a sudden the low end and the high end sort of detach from one another. It gets so far, and that happens with pianos a lot too, where the low keys feel like they're detached from the high keys. So sometimes a hard left, hard right pan doesn't really work well for a lot of stereo instruments. In fact, it sounds better if we do a modest pan, and let's just take it to 32, and we'll take the right-hand side to about the same thing, 33. Have a listen now. Now, the beauty of that is there's no detachment between the high and the low end. Plus, we get this sense of spaciousness, which is what the panning is all about anyway. And that gives us this beautiful feel of hearing the player play right across the stereo field, and yet we still have the spaciousness without any kind of detachment. So one of the reasons why it's important to stay away a lot of times from the hard left and hard right areas is the fact that you'll get a very, very wide stereo field, but sometimes it will just feel unnatural. And by being a little more modest with your panning, it will feel much more natural. Let's listen to the track now.
Soul searching, I'm a soul searching, I'm a soul searching. How could I say goodbye to you? I'm a
Now you can hear it where we still feel that spaciousness. It's still sort of up the middle, but it feels really good. So to sum it up, stereo provides a sense of spaciousness, and panning allows us to create excitement by adding movement within the stereo field. The most prominent music element is usually panned to the center, as well as the kick drum, the bass guitar, and even the snare drum, because this makes the mix feel strong and anchored. Back in the days when a drum kit was recorded with only a few microphones, the drums were recorded in mono, and sometimes even on a single track. Today, with most drum kits and drum loops tracked in stereo, the entire mix is built upon the idea that the drums will take up a lot of space in the stereo field. In this video, I'm going to show you a couple of different concepts that you can use for your drum panning. First of all, there are two ways to pan the drums: from an audience perspective, or how you're looking at the drums, or from the drummer's perspective, how he's looking at the drums himself or looking out at you, the audience. 90% of most mixers that I know pan it from the audience perspective, and that's very comfortable to them, although it might work from the other way as well. First of all, let's listen to this track with just the drums in mono, and listen to what they're like. They're powerful as is, but they don't have a sense of spaciousness. Now, the first thing we'll do is we'll pan out the overheads, and the overheads usually are left and right, and they work very well if they're panned hard left and right. They're also the most dramatic. It might not be the best way to put them, but at least to start, you can really hear it well. So let's go up and pan the left overhead and the right overhead and have a listen. All of a sudden, you get a sense of spaciousness from the drums, and you can hear that crash cymbal on the left-hand side. Later on, he goes to the right cymbal. It's on the right-hand side, which is just the way you'd be looking at it. Now, the next thing we're going to pan out is going to be the toms. And if we listen to the tom fills right now, they're all up the middle. Each single one of them are at the same level, but they're fairly boring as is. And the way we're listening to them live, if we're standing in the room 6 feet in front of the drummer, that's not the way it's going to sound. So let's start by just panning this out a little bit. We won't pan too much. We'll go about 30% to the right, 30% to the left on the rack toms, and the floor tom will take a lot wider because that's going to be at the edge of the kit. Now let's listen to the drum fill. Now I can go even wilder with that, and some mixers will do this. They'll take one rack tom and pan it all the way to one side. They'll take the other one and they'll put it up in the middle, and they'll take the floor tom and put it all the way to the left, and let's listen to what that sounds like. It doesn't sound quite as real that way because that's not what you would hear if you were standing 6 feet in front of the drums. The other thing that doesn't sound real is the fact that now all of the ambience coming off those microphones sound unbalanced. It doesn't sound like the real drum kit would sound. So what you're trying to do most of the time is trying to make it sound as real as possible. Now, there are times when you don't want it to sound real, you want it to sound unique. And those are the times when you go a little radical with your panning. But most of the time, we just want it to sound like it sounds. So we'll pan this left and right just a little bit and pan this out. The next thing that we're going to pan is the hi-hat, because the hi-hat now, if we're looking at the drummer, is going to be to the right-hand side, and it's going to be at the edge of the drum kit. So we're going to pan that out to here. First of all, let's listen without the pan. Now let's listen when it's panned out to the right. Now this is more like you'd hear from a real drummer. Sometimes you'd pan it in a little less than that, but most of the time it's sort of on the outside here. And again, you can get wild and you can pan it 100%. Usually with drums, when you start to pan things either hard left or hard right, it doesn't sound quite as natural. The only thing that does sound natural on drums that's hard left and hard right are the overheads. And there are times when you might not want to do that as well. Remember, the more space you have, usually the less power you have as well. So sometimes if you want the drum sound more powerful, you'll bring these overheads in and you'll bring it to somewhere in the middle between the hard left or hard right and the center. And this will give you a bit more powerful sounding kit. Going back to the hi-hat, something you should remember, we're talking about a real kit here, but if we were talking about samples, everything would sound a lot cleaner, and it would be possible for us to really pan everything hard left and hard right. And that would work most of the time, but there are certain times when that won't work. And I'll give you an example. That would be if you're doing something that's intended for a club, where you have to remember that anything that's panned hard left or hard right might not be heard by half of the audience. Because in a club, anything that's panned hard to one side isn't coming up on the other side, and that's where half of your audience is going to be. So you always have to keep that in mind, that sometimes you have to sacrifice the wide stereo field for the enjoyment of your audience. So you always have to keep that in mind when panning drums. So that's a couple of ways to pan the drums. You can pan them from the audience perspective or the drummer's perspective, but remember that you don't have to always pan the kit wide, since the kit may sound a lot more powerful if panned more to the center. Most synthesizers and virtual instruments have sort of a pseudo-stereo effect that makes the instrument sound larger than it really is when panned hard left and right. The problem is that this kind of effect can actually make your mix sound less distinct. In this video, I'll show you some techniques for dealing with some instruments that have artificial stereo, so you can hear that instrument better in your mix. So the first thing we're going to do is listen to some instruments that are in stereo. Some are artificially put in stereo, and some are recorded in stereo. The tendency is, if you have a stereo instrument, to pan it hard left and hard right. But the problem is sometimes that can actually cause more harm than good in the mix. Let's start with an electric piano. Let's listen to it in mono. Now this is recorded in stereo, and what makes it stereo is the fact that it has a channel that has vibrato on it, so you'll hear it warble a little bit. Let's pan that out in stereo. Now you can hear that it got wider, but what really is going to make a difference is what happens with the other instruments after this. Now the next one that we want to listen to is the strings. Now let's add the strings, and this was made stereo artificially by using a chorus. Let's hear what it sounds like. Now you can really hear that one warble as well. Usually what happens is one side is very, very stable and the other side is the one that has the warble on it in the stereo mix. Now, when you put two instruments together like this, you can actually hear them okay. It's not so bad, but as you begin to add more instruments that are panned hard left and hard right, that's when the problem begins. Now let's add the organ. Notice that the organ actually is assigned to a subgroup. So we have the high organ, we have the low organ, and they're both assigned to a stereo subgroup that's panned hard left and hard right. Now, as you can hear, there's a little bit of disconnection, as we talked about in a previous movie, where the low frequencies and the high frequencies don't seem to live together. And that makes it sound a little artificial. Let's add the electric guitar now, and once again, that was recorded in stereo. And it's also recorded left and right and assigned to a subgroup, which is panned hard left and hard right. And let's listen to that. When we have more and more stereo instruments that are panned hard left and hard right, we come up with a condition that I call big mono. And big mono basically means that when you pan everything in stereo, hard left and hard right, you don't really wind up with anything that's near a stereo field. Everything just sort of sounds the same and it steps on one another. The beauty of having stereo is the fact that we can put each instrument in its own little part of the stereo soundscape. And that's really what we want to do. It's the best thing for us to hear each instrument distinctly. So the first thing we're going to do is begin to pan things, and I'm going to pan the keyboards just a little to the left and a little to the right, and you'll hear immediately how things begin to change and we begin to hear them a little more distinctly. So let's take the organ. We're going to go to the subgroup on the organ. Even though you can see the B3 high and the B3 low are panned hard left and hard right, panning is actually going to follow what I'm going to do right here. So as you can see, I'm going to keep one of the channels hard left, and I'm going to have the other one that's, not quite as hard left. It's going to be up towards the center. And I'm going to take the electric piano. I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to keep one hard right, and I'm going to take another one that's more towards the center. Now let's have a listen. Now we have a little bit more of a sense of the stereo sound field, a little more spaciousness, but we still have that sense of big mono. So now I'm going to take the electric guitar and I'm going to pan it more towards the center. So I'm going to go to the subgroup. I'm going to pan this just a little off the center here, a little off on the right one. Have a listen. Now you can really start to hear the stereo. You can hear each instrument in its own little part of the soundscape. But we still have the problem with the strings. Sometimes an instrument that has artificial stereo actually sounds better in mono. And in this case, we're going to make this mono by panning both channels up the middle. And the easy way to do that is to hit the Option key and just click on each pan knob. And you can see they automatically go right to the center. Let's have a listen. Now you can hear they're each in their own little soundscape. The only problem is that the strings sound just a little on the dull side, so we're going to skip ahead a little bit to what we'll watch in another series of movies. We're going to add some long reverb onto the strings. We're actually going to make this somewhat stereo. We're going to put it into a stereo sound field and make it a little more spacious. And we're going to do that by clicking up here on the send and have a listen as we play it. So now you can see that a mono instrument can sometimes work better than one that uses artificial stereo. We have a sense of spaciousness, yet everything is in its own part of the soundscape. And this is the best way to make each individual instrument sound very distinct and jump out into the mix. A compressor is nothing more than an automated level control that uses the input signal to determine the output level. In this video, I'm going to show you all the parameters of a compressor and discuss how they each change the sound. All compressors have roughly the same parameter controls and are operated the same way, but they can sound different from one another because there are different ways of designing a compression circuit. Let's look at the controls. The first one is the ratio control. The ratio controls how much of the output level the compressor will increase compared to the level that's being fed to the input. Usually this is calibrated in a ratio that goes anywhere from 1:1 to 100:1. And what that means is if it says 4:1, every 4 dB that's coming into the compressor, only 1 dB will go out through the output. The next control is the threshold, and threshold determines the signal level where the compression actually begins. Below the threshold point, no compression occurs, and above it is when all the compression occurs. Many compressors are calibrated in dB, so a setting of -5 means that when the level reaches -5 in the input meter, the compression begins to kick in. The next controls are attack and release. Not all compressors have attack and release parameter controls, but most of them do. These controls determine how fast or how slow the compressor reacts to the beginning or the end of the signal envelope. The beginning is the attack and the end is the release. Some compressors have an auto mode that automatically sets the attack and release according to the dynamics of the signal. Some compressors have a fixed attack and release where you can't alter them at all. The attack and release controls are actually the key to proper compressor setup, but many engineers overlook these controls completely. That being said, it's possible to get good results by keeping these controls set to midway, but learning how to use them provides much more consistent and professional results. Gain control is sometimes called makeup gain or output. When a compressor begins to compress, it actually attenuates the signal. So in order to boost the signal back up to where it was when we started, we use a gain control, which adds some additional gain. Sometimes this is called makeup gain, and sometimes it's just called an output control. We can use this additional gain for other things as well, and we'll talk about that in later movies. The gain reduction meter is an indicator of just how much compression is occurring at any given moment. On most devices, this is either a VU or a peak meter, but it reads backwards. Let's take a look. This means that if it reads -12, there's 12 dB of gain reduction actually occurring. If it reads -6, it means there's 6 dB of gain reduction occurring. It usually varies in the amount of gain reduction depending upon the signal. The sidechain is used for connecting other signal processors to the compressor. The connected processor only receives a signal when the compressor exceeds the threshold and begins to compress. Sidechains are often connected to EQs to make a de-esser, which will soften the sound of the S coming from a vocal when they exceed the compressor's threshold. You can also connect a delay or a reverb or anything you want to the sidechain for unusual program-level dependent effects. You can also feed the signal from another channel into the sidechain and will cause the sound to trigger from that original channel. This is used a lot in electronic music, especially. Finally, the bypass control allows you to hear the signal without any gain reduction taking place. This is useful to help you hear how much the compressor is controlling or changing the sound. It also makes it easy to set the output control so the compressed signal is about the same level as the uncompressed signal. So those are the parameter controls on a compressor. In this video, we're going to look at how to set up a compressor. I'm going to show you how to configure the compressor so it breathes with the track, how to turn it into a limiter, and how to determine how much compression is right for the track. Timing of the attack and release is important so the compressor works correctly and makes the sound punchy or fatter, or makes the note have a longer decay. One of the easiest ways to set that up is to use the snare drum as your template, then use the same approximate attack and release settings for the other instruments. The idea is to make the compressor breathe in time with the track. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to our snare top mic and add a compressor. In this case, what we're going to do is we're going to put the compressor before the EQ here, and the reason for that is the sound is different if you put the compressor after the EQ. What ends up happening is if you put it afterwards is that anything that's emphasized on the EQ. For instance, if 3K is turned up, then that frequency is going to be compressed and it's going to be emphasized by the compressor as well. So it usually sounds better if you put the compressor prior to any EQ that you have. Doesn't mean that that's the way it always should be, but most of the time that's the way it works best. So let's listen to this soloed without any compression at all. There's a snare drum. Turn it up a little bit. So now what we want to do is set the compressor up so it breathes with the track. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the attack, we're going to turn it all the way to its longest, and we're going to take the release and we're going to turn it all the way to its shortest. Now let's play it again. Let's bring the threshold down so we see some compression. Okay, there we go. So we've got about 6 dB of compression here. I'm going to take the attack and I'm going to move it back. I'm going to make it shorter. Hear how the sound changes? We're cutting off the attack of the snare drum, the first part of the sound of the snare drum. You can see we got a lot more compression as well as we do that. This isn't what we want because it makes it sound unnatural. So we're going to move this back so we just begin to hear a sound change. Somewhere in there is good. Going to begin to move that back. You can see over here on the gain reduction meter, this is the amount of compression that we have. You can see how it's breathing with the track. Let's move this back a little more. What we're doing now is we're making the decay longer. So it sounds like the decay lasts from one snare hit to the other. Now let's bypass it for a second. Really hear the difference there. This is without any compression. Here's with it. You can hear how much punchier it is. Let's move this attack back a little bit more. Let's listen in the track, hear what it sounds like. Okay, I'm going to play it again. I'm going to bypass it this time.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, never like this before.
Now watch the meter here and watch the different levels of hits. I'm going to play it again. Watch. Sometimes it goes to -10, sometimes it goes to -6 here. Watch.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, never like this before.
You see some go -10, some goes a little bit higher. And in fact, the strummer is actually pretty good because he's pretty consistent. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to get that snare hit to be the same every time. So now let's play the same thing with the compressor in.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, never like this before. You got me tracking.
And that determines how much compression we're going to use. We're going to use enough that in fact the snare hit in this case is pretty much the same, so it doesn't change that much. You can hear how much more punchy the sound gets though when we have the compressor in.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, never like this before. You got me tracking.
One more time, only bypassed.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed,
And with compressor in.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, never like this before.
So what'll happen here is we'll also do the same thing on the kick drum, and we'll do it on the bass. We'll probably do it on the guitars. We'll do it on the vocals. We'll do it on any instrument that has any kind of variation in dynamics, because what we're trying to do is control the dynamics here. You can't make the dynamics completely go away, and you don't want them to, but you don't want the variation to be great as well. If they go, 3 dB either way, that's probably good. If it goes more than that, it's probably too much. Let's try the compressor over on the vocal. Now the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add it in here. And again, this is just the native compressor that comes with Pro Tools. Don't forget that just about all the parameters are somewhat the same, but even if they're different, it doesn't matter. What we're trying to get is the sound. We're trying to get the compressor to breathe with the track, and that's the most important thing. So let's listen to the vocal without the compressor.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, but never like this before.
Well, this is pretty good because it's actually been compressed when it was recorded, but we can still do a few more things to it. In this case, what we're trying to do is make sure that every word is heard. So we don't want a word to drop out at all. We want them all to be the same. There are some that will drop out anyway that you'll have to use automation and actually goose the fader a little bit so you can hear it. But for the most part, we can get most of them with the compressor. So let's set this up. Let's unbypass it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set our attack and release approximately the same as we did with the snare drum. This might change a little bit, but this is a good starting point. So we'll put 188 in for the attack, and we'll put 12.3 in for the release, and let's dial in the threshold. The threshold actually controls at what signal level the compressor is going to begin to work at. And let's move this back so we can hear it
I've
working.
been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, but never like this before.
There we go. We can hear it there.
You got me tracking behind you, running on my knees, pleading and begging for more. I say I heard a lot.
Now what's happened here is these attack and release settings have to be tweaked because you can hear the change in the vocal sound. And that's not what we want. We want it as pure as we can get it. So the first thing we're going to do is back off in the attack a little bit.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased,
Back off
but never like this
amount
before.
of gain reduction.
You got me tracking behind you, running on my knees, pleading and begging for more.
By the way, we're reducing the gain on the peaks, so that's why they call it gain reduction. But it's the same thing as the amount of compression.
I've been
Here's what it sounds like.
loved, squeezed, teased, but never like this before. You got me tracking behind you.
Okay, let's listen in the track.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, but never like this before. You got me tracking behind you, running on my knees, pleading and begging for more.
Okay, let's listen without it now. Let's bypass it.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, but never like this before. You got
Here's with it in.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, but never like this before. You got
So you can hear the difference in the vocal with the compression, without the compression. With the compression, it almost sounds like the vocalist is in the room with you. He comes closer to you in the mix. You can hear every single word that happens. In fact, there's a byproduct here. You can keep the vocal lower in the mix and still hear it really well. Without the compressor, some of the words of the vocal will drop out and you won't hear them. One of the reasons why we'd like to keep the vocal lower in the mix is it emphasizes the power of the band. On a pop record, usually the vocal is really on top of the band. It's really loud compared to the rest of the band. But if we want the record to sound really powerful, then we'd like to keep the vocal down even with the band. And the only way you can do that well is if you compress the vocal. Otherwise, it will sound weak. So this is what we'll do with all the other instruments that need it as well. We'll go and we'll listen to them and we'll see if there's a big variation in dynamics, and if there is, we'll insert a compressor. The amount of compression that we'll use is the amount that will keep the dynamics relatively solid, so we hear all of the chords. There's not one that drops out that we can't quite hear. And that's what gives you the feeling of having the vocal in the room with you. So let's talk about limiting. Right now we have the ratio set at 3:1, but anytime the ratio goes beyond 10:1, this turns into a limiter. It goes from a compressor into a limiter. Now, compression is used to control dynamics. What we're trying to do is take any peaks and bring them down, and we're trying to bring up any of the notes that are getting lost. What we're trying to do with limiting is to keep the next stage in the signal path from distorting. So in this case, what that means is it's going to take 11 dB before even 1 dB comes out. And that will probably mean that we can take any kind of peaks and not have a problem with the stage afterwards distorting. So there's a different mindset with using each of them. Sometimes we'll use limiting of 11:1 or 20:1 or even higher in order to change the sound of an instrument or a vocal, because usually anything that's 4 or 6 or 8:1 is just controlling the dynamics and we don't really hear it work. But anything that goes beyond 10:1, we begin to hear the color of the compressor. Sometimes that's what we want and sometimes it isn't. Okay, let's listen to the difference between compression and limiting. We're going to go back to a ratio of 4:1 and have a listen.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, and teased, but never like this before.
We can hear the sound change, but listen when we go to 10:1.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, and teased, but never like this before.
Now, all of a sudden, the sound of the compressor is what we hear more than the sound of the vocal, and it gets more severe as we go, let's go to 30:1, which is really quite high.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, and teased, but never like this before.
Let's listen to the track.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, and teased, but never like this before.
In this case, we can actually hear the compressor working. And what it's doing is it's taking some of those peaks and it's actually bringing them down too low. So the vocal sounds unnatural. That's why we like to use compression rather than limiting most of the time. There are times when limiting is really desirable, for instance, on a bass. The reason why is we want to keep the bass at a pretty solid level. We don't want it to vary too much, because as it varies, it makes the song sound not as powerful. It sounds a lot more powerful when the bass is at one level. So that's one time when we might use limiting instead of compression. Most of the time we'd like to use compression though. So that's how to set up the compressor. You should time the compressor so it breathes with the track by using the attack and release controls. An attack that's too fast will dull the sound of the instrument or vocal, while a release that's too short will cause it to pump. A ratio setting of 10:1 or more is considered limiting because it's trying to limit the output rather than control the dynamics. The more compression you use, the more you'll hear it working, and the amount of compression depends upon the song, the arrangement, the player, the room, the instrument or vocalist, or the sound that you're looking for. In order for the rhythm section to sound powerful, the drums and bass have to have an even level. Sometimes the drummer doesn't hit every beat on the kick and the snare with the same intensity, which makes the pulse of the song erratic. Sometimes the tom fills have different volumes across the drums. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use compression on the drums to make them punchy and steady in the mix. So let's listen to the mix without any compression at all. We hear a little bit of leakage there in the background, but that's okay. The first thing we're going to do is go to the snare drum and have a listen. There's two snare drums. There's a top and a bottom. We only want one. And take notice, since they're in a group, if we solo one, both of them solo up. And the way to get around that is hit Control and just solo whatever channel that you want to solo, and just that one will solo up. So now let's listen to the snare top by itself. I already have a compressor limiter installed in the snare channel. Let's bring that up. This is just the stock Pro Tools compressor limiter, And we're going to use this just to show you that it doesn't matter which one you use, you can make it sound really good if you know how to set it up. Let's insert it and hear what it sounds like. First thing I'm going to do is take the attack time and turn it all the way up. In other words, I want the attack time as long as it can be. So now I'm going to back off on it. And the whole secret here is, see, if you turn it too fast, it sounds pretty bad. The reason why it sounds bad is you've cut the transient off the front end of the sound, and you want to keep that. So the whole trick is to back off the attack until you just about hear it dull, and at that point, that's when you either stop or even back off a little bit. Let's try it again. Somewhere in there is really good. Now, the next thing we're going to do is set the release time. And on the drums, the best thing to do is set the release so it makes it seem as if the snare drum is elongated until the very next snare hit. Something like that. Now this may be a lot, and it's about 60 dB of compression. We want to start with only a couple, and we'll actually increase it as we go along if we need. But we'll start with a couple, and that will even out the inconsistencies between the hits, first of all. Back off the threshold. Now the ratio control is important because the more erratic the peaks are, the higher the ratio control should be. So in other words, if we have a big difference between a lot of the hits, then we want a higher ratio, and what that will do is we'll even things out a bit more. So we'll bring this up a little bit. Last thing we're going to do is we're going to set the gain control. When we initially insert a compressor, whenever the compressor exceeds its threshold, it attenuates the signal. And in order to bring that signal back up to about where it was before, we use the gain control in conjunction with the bypass. Let's listen. So there's without the compression, with the compression. It's about the same level, but you can hear that it's a little more punchy. Now that we did that one, let's go over and listen to the kick drum. We'll do the same thing. So now what we're going to do is hit Control, and we're going to hit the solo. Listen to the kick. Once again, we have the generic compressor limiter from Pro Tools, and we'll do the same thing. Bring our threshold down. Now, if we bring the attack so it's really, really fast, when I say fast, it means it works very quickly on the transients. You can hear how it gets cut off, and the sound of the kick actually changes. So if we bypass, you can hear the difference. So once again, what we're going to do is we're going to back it off until it's at its slowest attack. And we're going to bring it back until we can just about hear the transient dull. Now once again, we use the release exactly the same way. We lengthen the release until it makes the kick sound like it's lasting a lot longer. We want the kick envelope to fill up between the first kick and the next time it hits. And And once again, the more erratic that a sound is in terms of its dynamics, the higher the ratio. So we're going to increase the ratio so it pretty much stays within the same range. It doesn't matter if it goes a little bit higher and a little bit lower, but we don't want it to go a lot higher or a lot lower in level. And then finally, we'll use the gain control to give us about the same level as when the compressor is bypassed. So let's listen to it without any compression. Now let's listen to it with compression. And you can hear how much punchier it is with the compressor. Now let's listen to just the one kick and the one snare compressed. So you can hear how much punchier it is, and you can feel the pulse of the song a lot better. Now we'd actually go and we'd put the same compressor on the outside kick, which says kick out right now, and the bottom of the snare, which is snare bottom. And we might even put it on the toms as well, if the playing on the toms is erratic enough that each fill hit is at a different level. So to sum it up, we use compression on the drums to even out beats that aren't the same intensity and to make them sound punchier. We want to set the attack and release controls so the drum breathes with the track, and the threshold and ratio controls to determine how forward they are in the mix. Room mics provide the glue that pulls the drum sound together into a single cohesive element instead of just multiple drums. That said, how you compress the room mics can make a huge difference in the overall drum sound. In this movie, I'm going to show you how to compress the room mics to either pull the drum sound more together or emphasize the room ambience. First of all, let's listen to the drums without the room mic, and then we'll add it in. You can hear the difference. As you can hear, the room mic adds a lot to the drum sound, and it adds some cohesion to it, so instead of sounding like individual drums, it sounds like a full drum kit. But it will sound even better when we add some compression. Once again, I've added the generic Pro Tools compressor limiter plugin, just to show you that there's nothing special with this, and you can actually make everything sound good with whatever you have as long as you set it up the right way. So let's listen to what it sounds like when we insert the compressor into the channel. Now, just like with the other drums, what we're going to try to do is make this breathe with the track. So we're going to set our attack time relatively long and our release time relatively short, and make it so we can feel the breath of this track with that compressor as well. The other trick here is to take the ratio control and move it up until it's about 10-1 or 12-1 or even higher, because what that will do is it will emphasize the sound of the room a little bit more. So let's bring this up first of all to about 10-1, and let's have a listen. Once again, it's best to also listen to this with the rest of the drums rather than soloing it. This actually gives you a more cohesive sound when you do it this way. Now let's listen to it with the compressor bypassed and with it in so you can hear the difference. As you can hear, we've taken the punchiness of the drum track to another level by just these little tweaks. But now what we're going to try to do is emphasize the room ambience. And what we'll do is we'll increase the gain of the room mic, we'll increase the ratio a little bit, and we'll add even more compression. As you see, there's quite a bit already. There's about 10-1, and there's about 10 dB or 12 dB of gain reduction. But we'll increase that even more. Now we're emphasizing the sound of the room. Let's go back and play it, and we'll bypass the compressor so you can hear it without the compressor and with it. You've probably heard this sound on a lot of records because this is a trick that a lot of mix engineers use to punch up the track. So that's how we compress the room mics. Set the attack and release control to breathe with the track, then the threshold and ratio controls to keep the sound even. Increase the compression to 10 dB or more to emphasize the room ambience. For a mix to sound really powerful, the bass has to stay at a steady level. Most basses inherently have notes that are louder or softer than others depending upon where they're played on the neck of the instrument. This is especially noticeable on a bass played with a pick instead of fingers. In this video, I'm going to show you how to keep the level virtually the same throughout the song by using a compressor or a limiter. First of all, let's listen to the bass by itself. Now in this case we can hear some distortion coming from the amplifier because that's all we have. We don't have a direct channel, but that's okay. We won't hear that too much in the mix, so it won't matter at all. Not only did we hear distortion, but there's a few notes that are lower or louder in the mix. So what we want to do is even that out so they're all about the same. Let's insert the limiter. Now, just like we did with the drums, we'd like for this limiter to make the bass breathe with the track. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the attack as slow as it can go and the release as fast as it can go, and we'll work at it from there. Now once again, the idea here is to bring the attack back until the transient begins to get cut off and then stop right there. Now let's listen to it when the attack is too fast. Obviously that's not a good sound, so let's come back to where it should just about work. Pretty good. Now let's bring the release back so it makes it feel as if the bass is breathing with the track. Now there's an awful lot of compression there. It's about 12 dB, so we're going to back that off so we just have a few. Now usually that's enough to just make everything sound a little more consistent, but what we want is to make it sound rock solid. So one of the ways we do that is we raise the compression ratio. Right now it's about 3:1, which is fairly timid. Let's bring this up to about 10:1 or so. And one of the things that happens is, as soon as we go past 10:1, this now becomes a limiter. The only difference between a compressor and a limiter is the ratio. Anything above 10:1 is considered a limiter. Other than that, they're basically the same plug-in, they're the same device. So now let's bring the threshold down. Now the idea right here is we want to have plenty of compression, and the only reason why we want that is we want the level to be the same. Now what we're going to do is we're going to raise the gain so it's the same as without the compressor. If we bypass it, here's what it sounds like. It's quite a bit louder. Now let's listen to it with the drums, because that's where you can really hear the difference. So to sum it up, the more even the bass is in the mix, the more powerful the entire mix will sound. This is accomplished with the compressor, sometimes set up as a limiter with a ratio of 10:1 or more. Remember, the more wild the peaks are, the higher the ratio control needs to be to keep the bass steady in the mix. There's a great trick that really punches up the drum sound without adding more compression to the individual tracks. It's something I call the New York compression trick, because when I was first starting out, every mixer in New York used it on their mixes. Now everyone uses it, so it's not that exclusive to New York City anymore, so we can just call it by its more academic name, parallel compression. In this movie, I'm going to show you how the New York compression trick is set up. The trick centers around an additional drum subgroup that has a compressor with some rather extreme settings inserted into the signal path. Once the subgroup is set up and the compressor is kicking, the subgroup fader is gently raised until it's just barely heard underneath the original drum mix. If you want the drums punchier, just add more subgroup level. So you can see here I have a drum subgroup set up. This is called drum comp. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to add a compressor to it. Doesn't matter which compressor. In this case, I'm going to just add the generic Pro Tools compressor limiter, and I'm not going to worry about the settings right now. But what I will do is set up a input signal path to that particular subgroup. And in this case, I'm just going to select bus 23 and 24. It could be any two that you select. 23 and 24 just works for me now because they're open. Now I'm going to go down to the first drum channel, which is the kick in, and I'm going to select the send for it. I'm going to say bus 23 and 24, and up comes the send. I want to put this at about 0. The easy way to get there, you say option and you click on the fader and it automatically moves to 0, which is kind of nice. Here's another trick. In order to assign this particular bus, 23 and 24, to all the other channels, all you have to do is press and hold the option key and click and drag to the other channels. You click and drag that bus 23 and 24 send, and it's a very easy way to do things. Now that I'm sending it to the drum comp channel, let's have a listen to what it sounds like without that particular New York compression. Now let's look at the compressor. We want some rather extreme settings, so I'm going to bring this up to at least 10:1. Once it becomes 10:1, this turns from a compressor to a limiter. And it doesn't matter what plugin you have or what dedicated hardware piece, whenever a compressor is set at a ratio of 10:1 or more, it now becomes a limiter rather than a compressor. Now the whole trick here is to bring up the New York compression underneath the normal drum setting. And you just bring it up once again until you just hear it. You can hear how much punchier it's getting. Now let's listen without it and then with it in. Sounds pretty good, huh? One last thing. We're going to make this even more extreme by adding an equalizer to it. So, once again, I'm going to insert just a generic 4-band Pro Tools EQ. And I'm going to come down here to 100 Hertz and bring it up to about 3 dB or so. You can bring it up a lot more radical if you'd like to. And on the high frequency, I'll bring it up to 10K and bring this up 3 dB or so. And once again, you can make this a lot more radical if you like. And let's listen to what it sounds like now. We we have a lot more snap and a lot more low end. Now let's listen before the New York compression and after the New York compression. So that's how the New York compression trick is done. Clean electric guitars can greatly benefit from compression since they usually have a lot of dynamic range with a lot of peaks. In this movie, I'm going to show you how to control those peaks and keep the level steady with the right compressor settings. First of all, with an electric guitar, the more it's amplified, the more it's distorted, the less compression it usually needs. If it's direct, usually it needs a lot of compression in order to keep the level steady because there's lots of dynamic range. Let's have a listen to what Guitar 2 sounds like soloed. Now let's listen to it in the track.
Soul surgeon, I'm a soul surgeon. I'm a soul surgeon. How could I say goodbye to you?
You can hear it, but especially on the turnaround, it sort of gets lost. So let's add a compressor. Once again, we're going to just use the generic compressor limiter in Pro Tools. Solo it up first. Have a listen. And just like we did before, we're going to set the attack time as long as it will go and back it off until we start to hear the transient dull a little bit. So there's no transient there, we've gone way too far. Somewhere there is okay. Now let's set the release. Now we can do this a couple different ways. We can set it so it's fairly short and it breathes with the track, or we can set it so it's long so it elongates the envelope of the guitar itself. Let's set it a little bit longer first. Is actually pretty good there. Now the more peaks there are, the more dynamic range, the higher the ratio has to be, and that will control a little bit more. So everywhere except the turnaround, it sounds pretty good in terms of the level, but at the turnaround we begin to lose some of the chords. So let's bring the ratio up. Still pretty good. We're going to back off in the attack because I can hear some of the transients actually dulling a little bit on it. And let's add a little bit higher ratio. Now we're above 10:1, so it actually becomes a limiter. Listen again, especially on the turnaround. Now that's a little closer. The only problem is now we've lost some level because the compressor has attenuated the signal. So now let's use the gain control and the bypass switch in order to equalize the level between the pre-compression and the post-compression. Okay, that's about right. Now let's listen to the track.
Soul surgeon, I'm a soul surgeon. I'm a soul surgeon. How could I say goodbye to you? I'm a soul surgeon. Soul surgeon. I'm a soul surgeon. I made you cry. How could I leave?
So that's how we compress a clean electric guitar. Start with the attack and release set so it breathes with the track, and adjust the threshold and ratio controls for the right amount of compression. The more peaks the guitar track has, the higher the ratio will need to be. Distorted guitars are already naturally compressed, but a little extra compression can often make a lead guitar stand out from a track. In this segment, I'm going to illustrate the best way to compress a distorted solo guitar. First of all, let's listen to the track with the guitar just the way it is without any compression. It sounds pretty good already, and as a result of the distortion on the amplifier, it already has a lot of natural compression. The more distorted it is, the more compressed it will be. And obviously this isn't a metal guitar or even a hard rock guitar, but nonetheless you can still hear the edge on it. Let's listen to it soloed up just so you can hear. So this won't need a lot, but just a little bit is all we need to take it to another level. Once again, we'll use just the generic Pro Tools compressor limiter plugin. There may be something that sounds a lot better out there that you might have, but this will give you the idea of how to set it up. So, just as we did before, the attack is the real important part. We're going to set it up so we don't cut off the transient of the guitar. Let's solo everything up again and have a listen. You can hear the compression there at the end. Now, obviously there's too much there because what's happening is there's absolutely no transient at all. The tone of the guitar is still pretty much there, but the attack is gone, the aggression is gone. So we move it back again, take the attack as long as we can, and we gradually move it down until that transient just starts to go away. And with the release, a little bit shorter is better. We want this to breathe with the track. But now, since it's not playing rhythm or anything with the track, we just want it to sound natural. If it's too long, like this, it won't sound natural at all. If we have it really short, actually, that's pretty good, right about there. Let's listen with it bypassed. Once again, we'll even out between the bypass sound without any compression and with the compression. Let's listen to the track. One more time. We didn't add very much compression, but yet it stood out in the track. We didn't add more level than we had before, but yet you can feel it coming forward a little bit in the track. If we wanted to add more level, we can do it without even moving the fader. We can do it with this gain control here. Let's have a listen. So that's how we compress a distorted electric guitar. Start with the attack and release, set so it breathes with the track, and adjust the threshold and ratio controls for the right amount of compression. The more peaks the guitar has, the higher the ratio will need to be. Acoustic guitars generally have a lot of dynamic range, which means that they require some compression to keep the sound even in the mix. In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up the compressor to keep that signal steady and to keep everything even in the mix. So the first thing to realize is that acoustic instruments are usually a lot more dynamic than electric instruments, so they have to be controlled more, and that's why we use a compressor. The other thing to remember is the more wild the peaks, the higher the compression ratio should be, just like we did on other instruments. So let's have a listen in the track without a compressor, and you can hear how sometimes you hear it really well and other times it drops out in the track.
Swell kept up my name. Sometimes I didn't rest at all. I've been shifted, lifted up sky high, lost on a waterfall.
Now, one of the things to realize about an acoustic guitar that strums like this, it's almost a rhythm instrument sometimes because it's pushing the track along. Just have a quick listen without the acoustic and listen to the difference.
Swell kept up my name. Sometimes I didn't rest at all. I've been
So there's two things that happen here. The first thing, it takes up a nice frequency range in the middle that really sounds good. And the next thing is it pushes everything along. It's almost like another rhythm instrument. And sometimes with a good acoustic guitar track, you don't have to add percussion or something like that to make the track really move. That's the value of a good acoustic guitar track. Anyway, let's put our normal compressor in that we always use, which is the standard Pro Tools compressor. And let's have a listen. So like we did with other instruments, we're going to adjust the attack time until it just begins to dull because we were cutting off the actual attack of the instrument. That's when we want to back off a little bit. So let's do that now. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to back off on the release a little bit. We're going to make it longer. And because there's a lot of peaks, what we're going to do is we're going to raise the ratio up. Now we can hear the compressor kick in, and that's not what we want. So we're actually going to use something that we haven't used up until now, and this is the knee parameter. And what this will do is right at the point where the compressor kicks in, it will soften that a little bit. So instead of going from no compression to compression, it gradually turns on. So it makes it sound a little bit smoother. Now, I think the gain is different, and it should be because we're compressing a whole bunch. And the more we compress, the less the gain will be. So let's listen to it with the compressor bypassed and hear how loud it is. So what we're trying to do is use the gain control to even out the differences between the uncompressed and the compressed sound. And now that they're about the same, we can really hear the compressor working here. Let's listen to the track.
swell kept up my name. Sometimes I didn't rest at all. I've been shifted, lifted up sky high, lost on a waterfall.
We can hear it pushing the track along. We can hear all the strums. The problem is this doesn't really sound all that good, and sometimes that happens. Certain compressors sound better on certain instruments, and sometimes they just don't work as well. So we're going to try a different compressor. In this case, we're going to go to another native compressor in Pro Tools, and this is going to be the Bomb Factory BF76. And what this is a software emulation of the hardware UREI 1176, which has been standard in studios for 50 years about. This was actually one of the first compressors built and used by studios all over the world, and it's still revered by just about everybody. The thing about the 1176, though, or in this case the BF76, is that the attack and release controls work backwards from normal attack and release controls. So in other words, on the attack, the fastest is actually all the way to the right, and the slowest is all the way to the left. And that's completely different from what we see in most other compressors. So what we're going to do is back the attack off to its slowest, and we're going to put the release to its fastest, and have a quick listen. You can hear it getting even already. What we're going to do is we're going to back the attack off until we just about hear it dull, and when we hear that, we're going to back off. Now, we didn't hear it dull, and that's because this works so well for this particular acoustic guitar that sometimes there's just a perfect match. And it's because the attack time of the 1176, or in this case the BF76, is fairly slow. And now let's back off the release time and make it breathe with the track. Now let's listen in the track. Now, usually what I like to do in cases of an acoustic guitar that's strumming is back it off until you can just about hear it. And that way it will add motion to the track, which is what it's supposed to do. It will fill up an acoustic space, which is also what it's supposed to do, but it won't be too prominent so it drowns out the other instruments. So let's bring that back a little bit. Now let's just listen without it and hear the difference. After we EQ it and add some effects, this would sound really, really good. But now you get an idea of how to make it fit into the track, how to make it sound even with a little bit of compression, and what it will do to the motion of the track. More than most acoustic instruments, the piano is really capable of a huge dynamic range, and that means that it usually needs at least a little bit of compression to keep the sound steady in the mix. An acoustic piano is inherently a lot more dynamic than a synthesizer or an organ or even an electric piano, so it has to be treated differently as a result. In this video, I'll show you how to set the controls to keep those dynamics in check. Usually the more wild the peaks, the higher the compression ratio that you'll need, and the fewer the peaks, the lower the compression ratio. In this case, we're talking about an acoustic piano that's by itself. It's a solo acoustic piano. It's not something that's working in the track. And this is a lot more difficult than something that is with other instruments. The reason why is since it's kind of naked by itself, you can hear any compression artifact. So you have to be very careful about how you compress so you don't hear it. In this example, you're going to see that from verse to verse, there's a big dynamic difference in that the second verse is played a lot harder. So it's a little less dynamic, but it's also a lot louder. So we're going to have to control it from verse to verse. So let's listen without a compressor just so you can hear the difference. Now you can hear there that there are certain notes that are really a lot louder than the other ones, and there are some that are a whole lot softer, and that's why we want to use a compressor. So it evens those peaks and valleys out. So let's go to our normal Pro Tools compressor that we've been using all along. This is just a generic native compressor that comes with it. And Let's listen. Again, what we're going to do is we're going to take our attack time and we're going to make it as long as possible, and our release time we're going to make it as short as possible and start from there. What we're going to do is we're going to back the attack off until it begins to affect the attack portion of the piano sound. As soon as it begins to dull, then we know we've gone too far. Now, we've gone way far there, and you can hear it even introduces an element of distortion. And of course, that's something that we don't want most of the time anyway. So we're going to back that off again, and just about when we hear it begin to dull, that's when we're going to stop right there or even back off a little. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take our release and we're going to shorten it a little bit. In this case, since we're not playing with other instruments, the release can actually be a little longer than we'd normally have it. What we'd usually do is we'd make sure the attack and release were timed to the track. And in this case, we can actually be a little looser with the attack and release times. The attack time, not so much because, again, it affects the brightness of the track. But the release time, definitely. As soon as we hear it breathe, then we know we've shortened it up too much. But usually it can sound pretty good with the longer release. Just a bare acoustic piano by itself in a solo mode. Now what we're going to do is we're going to listen and bypass the way it was before. Now let's listen with the compressor. Now what's happening here is that as soon as the compressor kicks in, we can hear it. So that's why we're going to use the knee parameter. And what the knee does is it allows the compressor to gradually kick in, rather than doing it very abruptly. So it smooths out that sound when it initially begins to work. Let's listen. Now let's bypass it and have a listen. And let's adjust the gain a little bit so it's even with the mix. Again, whenever you use compression, what ends up happening is that it will actually decrease the peak so it sounds like it's a little quieter than it was without the compression. So you can hear how even that is. The peaks we've decreased a little bit, and the softer notes have been raised a little bit, which is what a compressor does. So now it's a lot more even. Now this will work great in a track with the rhythm section. By itself, it might not be as good, and you actually might want those dynamic changes with the solo acoustic piano. But this is what we do if we're going to use this in a track with the rhythm section to control the dynamics, something that we don't have to do so much with the solo piano. So to sum it up, in order to compress a piano, you start with the attack and release time and you set it so it breathes with the track or it breathes with the way it's being played. Then you adjust the threshold and the ratio controls to get the right amount of compression. The more peaks the piano has, the higher the ratio will need to be. Remember that the more compression used, the less realistic the piano sound. You can really hear the compressor rather than the piano. Like guitars, compression on keyboards depends on how wild the dynamic swings are. Sampled acoustic or electric pianos don't have nearly the dynamic swing of a real acoustic instrument, but they still can have quite a lot of peaks depending upon the way they're played. In this segment, I'll show you how to add compression to any electric keyboard to keep it strong and steady in the mix. So we're going to look at this electric piano. It's in stereo, but it's panned a little bit to the right. There's no compression on it. Listen to how it varies in level. There was quite a lot of variation there. He's a very good piano player, and that's what piano players do. They play dynamically. But that doesn't always work in the context of making a record. So that's why we use the compression in order to smooth those dynamic variations out a little bit. So let's listen in context with the rest of the instruments and hear how some of the notes fall away and you don't hear them, and other ones really dominate the mix.
Soul surgeon, I'm a soul surgeon. I'm a soul surgeon. How could I say goodbye to you? I'm a soul.
So let's solo it. We've already added a compressor, and again, it's the same generic Pro Tools compressor limiter. This can be anything you want. The setup is about the same, regardless of the compressor limiter. So the first thing we're going to do is set the attack as long as it will go, and let's have a listen. And what we're going to do is move this attack back. We're going to make it faster so it just catches the peaks without making it dull. Now, the more peaks that we have, the more dynamic range, the higher the ratio that we'll need. And what that will do is that will smooth those peaks out. So let's bring this up a little bit. So now you can hear there's not much of a difference between the loudest he plays and the softest he plays. And that's exactly what we're looking for. Now let's listen to if the compressor actually attenuated the signal. It sounds like it did a little bit, so let's listen to what it sounded like before we add the compressor and after. Let's listen in the track now.
Soul surgeon, I'm a soul surgeon. I'm a soul surgeon. How could I say goodbye to you? I'm a soul surgeon. Soul surgeon. I'm a soul surgeon. I made you cry. How could I leave?
Now, in fact, we can make the sound even smoother with a different compressor. This one is a little on the aggressive side, and you can hear it grabbing the transient. And there are other ones that sound smoother, and that's probably what we'd go for. But you get the idea of the setup. It's going to be the same regardless of the compressor that you use. So that's how we add compression to an electric keyboard. You start with the attack and release so it breathes with the track, then adjust the threshold and ratio controls for the right amount of compression. Even organ and string sounds, which aren't very dynamic, can benefit from a touch compression to make all the notes heard evenly, which pulls them in front of the mix. If there's one instrument that greatly benefits from compression, it's the human voice. Most singers aren't able to sing every word or line at the same level, so some words get buried as a result. Compression evens out the level differences so you can better hear every word. In this movie, I'll show you how to set up the compressor to do just that. The first thing we're going to do is listen to the vocal just by itself, so we're going to solo it.
Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's rough. I just can't seem to ever get enough. It's like I never, never like this before.
Now let's listen with the track. couple things. The first is that this track was already compressed when it was recorded, so it's fairly level already. Although towards the end of the turnaround, and Never Like This Before, we start to lose some of the words there. The other thing is you can hear a lot of sibilants, and that's an excessive amount of S's, and that's because of the way it was compressed originally. But we'll talk about that in another movie and how to get rid of it. So what we're going to do is we're going to insert, once again, our generic compressor. Let's solo the vocal track. And let's set it up again. What we'll do is we'll take the attack and we'll set it all the way as long as it will go. And we'll bring that back until we just about get rid of the transient. As soon as we hear the lead vocal begin to dull and the S's go away, then we know we've gone too far. Let's listen to it.
Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's rough. I just can't seem to ever get enough. It's like I never, I never.
So you can hear that's too much already because we're not hearing any S's.
Sometimes it's easy.
We're just hearing the very, very, very tip of it. Let's bring it back.
Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's rough. I just can't seem to ever get enough. It's like I never, never like this before.
Now that sounds pretty good right there. Now let's set the amount of compression. Once again, what we're trying to do is even out the peak so we hear all the words pretty much evenly.
Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's rough. I just can't seem to ever get enough. It's like I never, never like this before.
The next thing we want to do is when we use the compressor, we attenuated the vocal a little bit, so we lost some of the level. So now we're going to use the gain control and the bypass control to make sure we get that level back.
Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's rough. I just can't seem to ever get enough. It's like I never, never.
That's about right there.
Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's rough.
Now let's listen in the track.
Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's rough. I just can't seem to ever get enough. It's like I never, never like this before.
So now you can hear those words as we get towards the end of the verse on the turnaround. We can hear them a little more clearly. Probably what we'll have to do is ride that vocal a little bit, and that's not uncommon. To either automate it or just ride it with the fader a little bit, because the compressor can't get everything out, but it can get a lot of it. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make it sound fairly good, in your face, and even. And then the rest we do with fader automation and riding the faders a little bit. So to sum it up, we use compression on a vocal because it evens out the level differences so you can better hear every word. Start with the attack and release set so it breathes with the track, then adjust the threshold and ratio controls for the right amount of compression. Remember that too much compression can cause sibilance and make the vocal sound unnatural. Like most acoustic instruments, horns can have a wide dynamic range. Either with brass or woodwinds, the same compression principles apply. Let's look at how we compress a solo tenor sax. So let's listen to the sax by itself. So there's a lot of dynamic range difference between all the notes, and what we're trying to do is even them out. So the first thing we'll do is go to our dynamic plugin, and once again we'll use the standard Pro Tools Dynamics plugin. And let's have a listen. Now you can see it's compressing a lot, and that's because the threshold is down below what it needs to be, so let's bring this up. So like with other instruments, we set the attack and release time so it breathes with the track. Since there's no rhythm track for us to set the attack and release, we're going to set it so it sounds best within the context of the solo sax. But the first thing we want to do is set the attack. And the attack is set so just about the time we hear the attack part of the sax envelope cut off, we're going to stop there and I'm going to back it off a little bit. So let's listen to it with the attack cranked up to where it really sounds bad, first of all. You can hear the brightness go away, and of course we want to maintain that. So the first thing we do is bring it all the way as far as we can to its longest attack time. So that's working pretty well, but you can see once we set the attack time that long, in fact, there's no compression that happens. So what we want to do is back it off a little bit until we just about hear it begin to dull. Let's go again on the loud parts. And now what we're going to do is bring the threshold down so the compressor kicks in. What we're doing here is we're lowering the peaks, and if we wanted to actually bring up some of the softer sections of the sax solo, what we do is we compress it a bit more. So let's do that. So you can hear that all the notes are just about the same. Last thing we want to do is set the gain. And the way we do that is we bypass the compressor. And then what we'll do is compare the level of the bypass compressor to when the compressor is in the circuit. So to sum it up, we use compression on either brass or woodwinds to even out the level differences between notes and phrases. Start with the attack and release so it breathes with the track, then adjust the threshold and ratio controls for just the right amount of compression. A gate is sort of a reverse compressor that can be used to eliminate leakage noises and buzzes and coughs and any other low-level noises that were recorded on a track. Sometimes it's called a noise gate or an expander, but it's all the same thing. In this video, I'm going to show you all about the various parameters of a typical gate. So a gate works backwards from a normal compressor in that the sound level is at its loudest until it reaches the threshold, and that's when it becomes decreased or even muted completely. Like a de-esser, a gate can sometimes consist of just a few controls, principally the threshold, the range, and sometimes even hold, attack, and release controls. Also, just like a compressor, threshold selects the level where the gate begins to work. First of all, let's listen to the floor tom with the gate bypassed. So you can hear the leakage from the other track. And now let's take the bypass off and have a listen to what happens. And you can hear how it attenuates everything else except for the loudest section. We can tweak that. Actually, before we even do that, let's put the threshold all the way up and have a listen to what that does. And as you can hear, you never did hear the floor tom, and the reason why is the threshold was set so high that it could never be triggered. And if we put it all the way to the left at minus 60 dB, listen to what happens. The threshold is set so low that once the gate opens up, it doesn't close again because there's enough level to keep it open. So now what we'll do is we'll tweak that, we'll put it somewhere in the middle and have a listen and tweak as it goes along. And let's back that up even a little more. Now, in order to make it sound realistic, we don't want the gain reduction at max. What we'd rather have is the audio attenuated rather than completely cut off. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the range control and we're going to back that off somewhere in here between minus 12 and minus 18 or so. And that's even a little too much. We'll back it off more. around there. And that sounds a lot more natural. Now, the other thing we'd want to do, if we decided that we were going to put our gain reduction at max here, then our attack and release controls become very important. These are the same as on a compressor. We're going to affect the front end of the signal envelope with the attack control and the back end with the release control. Let's listen to what happens as we manipulate the attack control. That's with it at 10 milliseconds. Let's put it all the way up to 300 milliseconds and have a listen. Actually sounded pretty good. Let's put it where it's really fast. This is 10 microseconds. Now what's happening is it's so fast that the leakage is actually triggering it. So that's way too fast, and what we want to do is back that off until the leakage didn't trigger the gate. Now that last snare hit we may not be able to get rid of, and that's one of the fallacies about a gate, and that you can eliminate everything, and you really can't. You can attenuate things and you can get rid of most of them, but sometimes on fills, for instance, especially on a drum kit, you just can't get rid of everything, so you have to keep that in mind. That's pretty good. Now, if we take the release control and let's put that all the way fast and have a listen to what it does. When it's fast, it controls the envelope of the signal and it shuts it down completely, really, really quickly. And let's put it the opposite way where it's a really long release. Have a listen. And you can hear it fade out because the envelope is kept open by the release control, and then it gradually fades from there. Now it's more in the middle like this. Have a listen. The other control that's important is the hold control, and this holds open the gate before the release control kicks in. We can set this at 5 milliseconds and have a listen to what happens. It's kind of abrupt what happens when it closes. And we can put it all the way so it's at 4 seconds and listen to what happens. It's holding the gate open so much that it never gets a chance to close. So obviously that's not going to work either, and it's somewhere in the middle here. And again, you have to experiment with it. There's no formula for it. You just have to experiment until you get it right. Gates are very touchy things, and they do require experimentation. So that's pretty good there, but it would sound even better if we back off on the range. Somewhere in there is about where we'd like it. See, we don't want to get rid of the leakage completely. What we'd rather do is attenuate it, and it sounds a lot more natural. And that's one of the fallacies of a gate, that you want to get rid of everything completely, and you really don't. You just want to move it back in the mix enough that you really don't hear it and it's not prominent. Now, one of the cool things about gates is the sidechain. And not all gates have a sidechain, but when you have it, it can be very powerful. And what this does is tune in the band of frequencies where the gate actually activates. And the other thing you can do is actually control this from another channel, for instance, or from another outboard device. But really, it's the high and low frequencies that you can balance out here, so we can affect that band of frequencies that opens the gate. So now what we're going to do with the low frequency is we're going to back that off, and basically we're cutting everything off under 16 kilohertz. Have a listen. So you can hear just about everything was attenuated, which isn't what we wanted, so we'll back that off somewhere in here. Still, you heard a lot of the frequencies attenuated, which isn't what we want. That's better. Now we'll go to the high frequencies and we'll just zero in on a particular band. This usually works better on something that has a lot of high frequency content, like a snare drum, rather than a tom, but you get the idea. That was pretty good. Now, a way to help you tune this is a little listen button up here. Now, all we're going to do is we're going to listen to the bandwidth that the gate is reacting to. Now watch what happens. What we're hearing there is just the frequencies that the gate is going to react to. So if we take this off and have a listen. And the reason why it doesn't sound so good is it's just listening to the attack of the sound. And really what we want is the body and everything. So we want to back that off so we can hear more of the drum. Have a listen. And you can hear how it even cuts off the snare drum at the end as a result. And what we do is we'd use that sidechain listen in order to tweak everything and fine-tune the opening of the gate. And this is especially effective on a snare drum, for instance, where we can really tune it just so those high frequencies open up the gate. Works really, really well. The last thing is the look-ahead button. And what that is it's a function that you only find in modern digital gates. It looks ahead at the signal so it can react only to the peaks. And this is a brilliant function that you don't find on hardware gates. And the reason why is hardware gates are analog, and usually they're a little slow at working because they don't have this look-ahead function. Look-ahead function really does look at the signal a few milliseconds ahead of time and allows the gate to have enough time to react. And this makes it very, very precise. So those are the parameters of a gate, which is an audio component used to eliminate or decrease noise or leakage in the track. But like compression, remember that a little goes a long way. As I said in the previous video, a gate is sort of a reverse compressor that can be used to cover up any noises or buzzes or coughs or any kind of low-level noises that were recorded on the track. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use a noise gate to clean up a guitar track. So the first thing we're going to do is have a listen to this track so you can hear the noise and you can hear the guitar play when it comes in. Now what you're hearing there is a very loud Marshall that's set up so it sounds good for the guitar player, but as a result it has a very loud buzz and you can hear some string noise and everything prior to the guitar entering. So what we're going to try to do is get rid of that. So we're going to bring our expander gate in and just have a quick listen. These are some random settings and let's hear what happens. Now, if you take notice, this worked great from the standpoint that it got rid of the noise at the beginning, but it also didn't sound all that good when the guitar entered. And that's where some tweaking on the parameters really helps. So the first thing we're going to do is play with the threshold, and let's bring that down to a place where it kind of works for us. Let's just see what happens down here. That wasn't that good because it really didn't get rid of the noise at the front, and that's what we're trying to do. Now that was kind of perfect because it got rid of the noise at the front of the guitar solo, and yet it didn't affect the guitar when it entered. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make sure that it sounds just as good as if we didn't have a gate in, yet get rid of the noise at the same time. Now, sometimes when we get rid of the noise completely, it sounds unnatural. You don't always have to cut it off completely. Just lowering it sometimes is quite enough. Now, if you take notice on the left-hand side, you see the in and out meters and another meter called GR, and this is gain reduction. And really what it is the amount that the gate is attenuating the noise when it opens. And we're down at about -40 now. And really, it doesn't have to be that low to be effective. Now, if we go to the range control, we bring it up to, -15, -12, somewhere around there. Have a listen now. So what happened there was you can actually hear some of the buzz before the guitar entered, but it was attenuated enough that you'd never hear it in the track. It would never be one of those things that would stick out or muddy up the track in any way. So that's really what we're trying to do, make it sound natural, but attenuated enough that we don't notice it at all. And never worry about getting it completely eliminated, because sometimes it sounds very natural when you do that. So that's how we set up an electric guitar with the gate. We'll take a look at attack and hold and release in context with drums in the next video. Just as we discussed on the video with the noise gate on the guitar, a noise gate is sort of a reverse compressor that can be used to cover up noises and buzzes and coughs or any kind of other low-level noises that were recorded on the track. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use a gate to clean up your drum tracks. Sometimes the drums actually sound pretty good with leakage from one to another. Many times what ends up happening, though, it makes them sound kind of muddy, and adding some noise gate to get rid of the rest of the leakage from the drum kit or from other instruments really cleans the sound up a little bit. So let's experiment a bit with adding some noise gates, and the easiest way to hear it is on the snare drum. So let's go over and listen to our snare drum for a second. Now what you're hearing here is leakage from the hi-hat, and that's because the easiest placement on a snare drum so the drummer doesn't hit the microphone happens to be close to the hi-hat, and therefore you're always going to get a certain amount of leakage. You also get some leakage from the kick drum, and you'll also get some leakage from the toms as well. So the only way to get rid of any kind of leakage like that is to use a noise gate. Even with the very directional microphone, it doesn't work nearly as well as putting a gate on it. So let's try that. So we'll go to our dynamics list in the plugins, go to expand your gate, and there we are. Let's just have a listen to what it sounds like with the default settings. Well, that's not going to work because obviously it's cutting off the noise, but it's also cutting off the sound of the snare drum. So the first thing we're going to do is back off on the threshold and have a listen. Now you can hear it's getting rid of some of the leakage, but it's also getting rid of some of the drum envelope as well. And we want to make sure we keep that as much as possible. So that's where the attack and the hold and the release settings come in. Let's experiment a little bit. So now we hear the attack pretty good. Let's back off on the threshold. Now you can hear what's happening. Now we're starting to hear just the snare drum itself, and we're getting rid of a lot of the leakage. And what's happening here is we're trying to preserve the envelope. We want to hear the attack, and we want to hear the release of that snare drum as well. And we want to hear the full dynamic envelope of it. And the only way to do that is to use the release and the hold parameters. That's pretty good there. So let's listen without the noise gate. Let's listen with it now. You can still hear a little bit of the hi-hat on the release, but that's okay. It's attenuated enough that we'll never notice. And actually in the track, what we're trying to do is just clean things up, and it's incremental. As we get rid of some of the leakage, it doesn't sound like it's a big deal on one drum, but as we put it on 3 and 4 and 5, all of a sudden it just sounds a lot cleaner, especially when you add the other instruments in. So let's listen with the track for a second. I'm going to bypass it now. Now, we didn't hear a whole lot of difference in the track, but that's okay. What ends up happening again, it's a cumulative effect against all the drums. The other thing is, if we were to trigger another instrument or to trigger a separate snare reverb, you would find that it would be a lot cleaner because there'd be a lot less leakage that's actually going into the reverb. So that's why this is important here to use that. Take notice the range is at -40, and that tends to sound fairly unnatural. So a lot of times what we want to do is back that off so it's -15 or -12 or something. Have a listen to what it sounds like. Now we can still hear the leakage, but now it's attenuated a lot, and that's what we're trying to do. We're just trying to bring it down in the track. We don't necessarily want to eliminate it, because sometimes when we eliminate it completely, it sounds unnatural, and we want it to sound as natural as possible. Let's listen on another drum now. Let's go to the floor tom. Solo it up. You can hear there's a lot of leakage there. Let's go and add the expander gate. Have a listen. That doesn't sound good at all. Once again, the only thing we want here is just the hit from the floor tom. Keep on moving the threshold back. Now here we go, we're getting closer. But again, listen to the release. It's cut off on the floor tom hit. Try that again. Let's bring the hold back. It's getting closer. There we go, that sounds a lot more natural. Let's back off on the release still again. There we go. And once again, we can still hear the leakage from the other drums, but what we're trying to do is attenuate it, not necessarily eliminate it. So what we'll do with our range control is back that off once again to somewhere around -15 or -12, somewhere in there, and it will sound a lot more natural. Now have a listen with the gate bypassed. Let's listen in the track. You can hear that's cleaning up a whole lot. And if we went and continued on the other drums, it would clean up even more. So that's the way we use noise gates on drums. Sometimes a vocal has short bursts of high-frequency energy where the S's are overemphasized, and that's known as sibilance. It comes from a combination of mic technique by the vocalist, the type of mic used, and heavy compression on the vocal track. Sibilance is nasty sounding and generally felt to be highly undesirable, so a special type of compressor called a de-esser is used. In this video, I'm going to show you the typical de-esser parameters and what they do. So first of all, a de-esser is a tunable compressor, and it allows you to compress only a selected band of frequencies, usually between 3 and 10K, and specifically to eliminate sibilance. Now, you'd want to use this rather than an EQ, because if you use an EQ, you'll cut out those frequencies all the time, which is undesirable, and it just won't sound the same. And that's why a de-esser works a little bit better. First of all, let's listen to what sibilance is. Let me play you a track with a lot of sibilance. This is a vocal track.
Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's rough. I just can't seem to ever get enough. It's like I never, never like this before.
So the S's really come out at you. They really spit out, and that's what we want to get rid of, because they'll just jump out of the track and they'll make you crazy when you listen to it later. Most de-essers only have a couple of controls. They have a frequency control, and that allows you to tune in the exact frequency where the S's are happening. And the reason for that is everybody has a little bit different frequency where the sibilance occurs at. The second control that you have is a range control, and that's the amount of attenuation that you'll have at that particular frequency. The other thing that you have on many de-essers is a listen control, And that allows you to listen to just the particular high frequencies where the sibilance is happening so you can dial it in a little bit better. And let's have a listen to what that sounds like. We'll engage the listen control. Here it is.
Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's rough. Just can't seem to ever get enough. It's like I never.
So between the listen control and the frequency control, it allows us to zero in on the sibilance, and then it allows us to control it as a result. Sometimes a vocal has short bursts of high-frequency energy where the S's are overemphasized, and this is known as sibilance. A de-esser, which is a selective frequency compressor, helps eliminate this undesirable effect. Let's see how to use it. The first thing we'll do is we'll listen to a vocal that has a lot of sibilance. Solo it up and listen.
Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's rough.
Now you can hear the S's just jump out. There's way too much there. So the first thing we're going to do is insert under Dynamics. It says de-esser, and this is the plain vanilla de-esser that comes with Pro Tools. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to hit the listen button, and we're going to try to zero in on the frequency where the sibilance happens.
Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's rough. Just can't seem to ever get enough. It's like I never, never. Sometimes it's easy.
So it seems like about 6.1 kilohertz, right around there is where we have the S's. So now the next thing is to set how much the sibilance is attenuated.
Sometimes it's easy,
Now, it's attenuated a lot here. Let's listen to what happens.
sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's rough.
So as you can hear, there's hardly any S's there, and it just doesn't sound good. It wrecks the vocal. But we don't really want a whole lot. We just want a little bit. We want to de-emphasize that sibilance just a little bit.
Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's rough. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's rough.
One more.
Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's rough.
Now, let's bypass it and have a listen before and after.
Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's rough. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's rough.
Now let's listen to the track.
Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's rough.
As you can hear, it sounds very, very natural. And that's what a de-esser does. It gets rid of the sibilance for us. It makes everything sit in the track a lot better. So to sum it up, use a de-esser to eliminate sibilance from a vocal by using the frequency control to find the offending frequency. Then, use the threshold or range control to dial in the proper amount.